Welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. Let us help you escape your mind. All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 263 tonight, and we are live, and we are joined by
ladies and gentlemen.
We are joined by special guest Randall Carlson. Randall's been on the show a couple times in the past. If you're interested in those episodes, I believe both of them are about Atlantis and metaphysics. You can check out those links down below. Randall's got some interesting stuff coming up. If you're interested, he's going to be on Joe Rogan on the 11th with Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock has that new show coming out, Ancient Apocalypse, and Randall will be on that show. What episode is that, Randall? Is that 8? Episode 8?
I will be on episode 8.
Okay.
The climax of the whole series.
Awesome. Super excited for that. And if you're interested in any of Randall's stuff, I have all the links down below. His YouTube channel, his podcast link to Kosmographia, his website, and his HowTube page. He is also doing a special this Sunday night on the Day of the Dead. So look forward to that as well.
Boo.
Also, before we get started, I started a new podcast on the side with our producer Shane and our other buddy Toby. Shout out to Toby. Shout out to Chase. It is called the Roswell UFO Symposium. It's gonna be mostly on the UFO UAP subjects, but we're gonna have tons of the top minds and guests in that field on there. So go check that out. I have the Linktree link down below, and if you want to support Mind Escape, all you have to do is click the link down below, the Linktree. We've got a merch store. We've got a Patreon. We've done 2 Patreon episodes with Randall. The first one we did was on sacred geometry. He gave us a little lesson, and then the second one was on the cosmic numbers. Both very, very good episodes, so go check that out if you're a Patreon member. If you're not, you can join pretty easy. Just click out the link. And, shout out to Sandy. I've got the Plutonian caves behind me. Our friend of the show, Sandy, just went to Eleusis and basically went through all the ritual sites and everything. So can't wait to catch up with her when she gets back. So shout out to Sandy. But without further ado, welcome back, Randall. How are you?
Doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me back. It's been a while. I was starting to get a little concerned because I was thinking that maybe you guys didn't love me anymore. But
no, we love you, bro. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
That's how I feel sometimes. So don't worry about it.
Just busy with stuff.
Oh, okay.
Just busy. We actually were working on a documentary. We're going to release it in March at the Roswell UFO Expo. So again, check that out if you're interested. And you're interested in our documentary, which is called The Experiences from UAP to DMT, but we might change the name because there's some copyright stuff going on. So, there's no harsh feelings, Randall. We love you.
Oh, good. Okay.
You're welcome on any time.
I feel so much better now, and I just made a mess, spilled my coffee.
Uh-oh.
So I was going to talk about some catastrophes tonight, so it's appropriate, I guess, that we start.
I was just going to say, you start off with one.
Catastrophe. Yeah, start out with. Although, as far as I know, there's going to be no widespread global mortality resulting from this one. No mass extinction events or any of that. So, anyhow, no. The biggest loss was now I don't have my cup. My cup of coffee has a 1/4 inch in it. And it was brewed up special. It was fresh ground from imported Sumatran coffee.
Ooh,
very delicious coffee. My favorite now that I've. So yeah, it's a real tragedy. What
just
can
blame
I say?
Maurice. He's back. We can blame him.
I'm the scapegoat. You know what I mean? I'll take the blame. It's all right. I'm used to it.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah. I could use a few more scapegoats in my life.
Beautiful.
So, what I need. See, here's the thing. Look at this. Now, notice this cup gets narrower towards the bottom.
Yeah, that's
so right there,
flawed design there.
It's a flaw. It should get wider to the bottom, right? And then it doesn't.
You can never get it right. I've got this Yeti. I just took a sip and I forgot how hot this keeps coffee because I usually drink cold water out of it. And I almost burned my mouth. So
I see the.
We're all
I see the bliss.
Gotta be careful with the Yetis.
The Yetis. Now, how did the Yetis suddenly get into the conversation?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how we got there, but I'll tell you what. I don't believe in
somehow. Oh. So, do you guys think that that the Bigfoot? Not to get off on the discussion of Bigfoot, I'll just ask you: do you guys think that it may be somehow related to Gigantopithecus? At least the Yeti. That always struck me as being a possible, not that it's necessarily Gigantopithecus, but something closely related to Gigantopithecus. Not having seen one personally myself, I don't know. When the day I see one, then I will be convinced. But
I mean, I've been talking with some people from doing this other podcast, this UFO podcast on the side, that seem to really believe, some intelligent people that believe Bigfoot's out there. I am very skeptical. I'm going to go as far as 99% a physical Bigfoot does not exist. However, this is something I've been saying for a long time, and I truly believe this. Because you mentioned Gigantopithecus, I think it's entirely possible that since we lived alongside these things at some point, and there are all these oral traditions and Native American myths and everything, I think it's possible that we're having some sort of epigenetic memory or flashback. Maybe our fear center, our amygdala, or our adrenaline gets pumping. And, like you run up the stairs and something's chasing you, kind of a thing, and it kind of gives you like a fear response. So I think it has something to do with that, to be honest with you. But I'm open-minded. If somebody was like, "Hey, I've got Bigfoot bones," and it like checks out, I'm down for it.
Yeah, I've got a selfie posing with a Bigfoot. So.
Well, then you've cracked the case. I do too, but it actually turned out to be one of my uncles. So.
Okay.
Where do you stand? Where do you stand on it?
I'm kind of with you. I'm skeptical, but at the same time open-minded. Like I said, when I first discovered the existence, I was in middle school, literally. So, this was when the first stuff started coming out. Who was the author back then who wrote several best-selling books? Would have been in the 60s, dealing with. We talked about John Keel a little earlier, and he was one of the early authors who addressed the UFO phenomena. There was, let's see. It'll come to me in a second. It was one of the very first books. Before those guys. It wasn't specifically about UFOs. It was more about cryptozoology. Although I don't think he used that term. I don't think the term cryptozoology had been invented yet.
I think I know who you're talking about. I can't remember the name, though. If somebody knows, come back. Pop it in the comments.
Okay. Yeah, who I'm talking. This would have been 60s. He came out with... was it something unknown? It'll come to me. It's one of those things that's buried way back there. I literally read the book when I was probably 14 years old, 15 years old. But he dealt a lot. He had stories in there about sightings of Bigfoot and all of that. And, of course, at that stage in my life, I really wanted to believe there was Bigfoots out there. But now I'm a little older and a little more skeptical.
Well, I would think that you could find something, right? Some sort of physical evidence. And look, there's a lot of people that put a lot of time into this, but I don't know. I haven't seen anything worth investing a lot of my time into it. So
when Joe Rogan, remember he did that ill-fated series for a while? Yeah. What was it? Joe Rogan investigates everything.
Yeah, Joe Rogan questions everything.
Well, yeah, he I think went into dealt with the Bigfoot thing at least on one or two episodes or something, and I think he came away less of a believer than he went into it. I think that's the option. I never saw the shows. I should go back and review them. But I think that was the gist of it, was that he maybe decided that a lot of the Bigfoot community was a little bit out on the fringe.
Well, that brings up another good point, though, too.
I think it's just like the. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say I think it's kind of just like the Loch Ness Monster thing. I think that there might have been something seen at one point, and then it probably died off. But at this point, it's hard to believe that no one's been able to capture anything with the technology that we have.
Yeah.
But then again, I know a lot of people think it's some kind of interdimensional type of creature too. So that
there's that. I would say this though too, and you mentioned that there's the outskirts or the wild man or feral man hypothesis too. That since the beginning of civilization, there's always been these people that have kind of just lived on their own, or like not hermits per se, but people that are like feral human beings, that live on the outskirts of society, that get hairy, and I mean, it could be something like that too. So,
have either one of you guys ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh or Gilgamesh? The character Enkidu. I've read multiple versions of that, but I'm always kind of started thinking, wild, big, huge, wild, hairy guy living out in the woods, and this Enkidu sounds an awful lot like Sasquatch.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any connection there.
I wonder too. I mean, I've tried to make a lot of those correlations as well, but they never really seem to work out well for me. But before we get going into the catastrophism, there's something I brought up to you, and I want to mention it because I think it's kind of important. So last time you were on, the first thing we talked about was the Chicago fire and the, how do you pronounce it? And the
Peshtigo.
The Peshtigo forest fires, and all that devastation. So about a week and a half ago, I was thinking, man, we got to get Randall back on the show. And literally, I'm not joking you, later that day, I was driving and I was listening to Operation Trojan Horse on Audible.
Okay.
And I've read it a few times, but I didn't really remember this or put two to two together. But he mentions in there, I think it's chapter 2 or chapter 3, I forget, but he talks about October 8th, 1871, Mrs. O'Leary's discontented cow kicked over a lantern, causing, the Chicago fire. That's what most people like to believe. And then he goes into, most people forget there was a gigantic fireball that was seen flying low over several states that caused death and destruction, not seen again until World War II air raids. And I think this is important because, even though Operation Trojan Horse is about the phenomenon and UFOs and UAP and all that stuff, he's talking about a fireball. You're talking about a fireball. Everybody's talking about a fireball, or you two, I should say, are talking about a fireball. And you had no connection to that. When I mentioned it to you, you had no idea what I was talking about. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's important because there's two people who do a lot of research that are pointing to this event and saying, hey, there's this fireball thing happening here. So I don't know.
And does he give a source for that, or are there accounts?
No, I mean, I could probably look into it more. Yeah, I could probably look into it more. But that was just, it was kind of, he mentions it just like quickly and kind of moves on. He doesn't really go into, he's just talking about like mythology and,
Well, yeah, I don't know specifically about a documented fireball. Now, in a lot of the anecdotal accounts, people are describing things that could be very much like a fireball.
Okay.
But to say that there was a fireball that passed over several states on October 8th, 1871, I don't know of a specific documented account. I'm going to have to go back and do a little research now to see. I have not seen that. As far as, back in those days, I mean, even the scientific press was regularly reported on meteorite and fireball sightings and things. I've got many in my archives of, on such and such a date over such and such a state, many people witnessed a great fireball going over without necessarily there being any fires, although as a consequence. So that in itself, may not, there's lots of fireballs, meteorites, even that crash to the earth without setting off a firestorm. And he does say, and yeah, you could say that there probably were not fires on that scale until some of the, the fire bombings of, Tokyo and Dresden were both examples of non-nuclear firestorms that were created.
100,000 people died in Tokyo. From napalm. That's actually more than the atomic bomb, or I guess both atomic bombs combined. The first two, Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Well, yeah, and I think the atomic bombs, when you include the deaths due to radiation over the next couple of years, I think it would exceed.
Right.
But yeah, those fire bombings were horrible affairs, and in the immediate wake of the atomic bombings, the high command, the Japanese military, didn't really understand, because they had already seen the firebombing of Tokyo. And if you look at Tokyo, the aftermath of that, it looks every bit as devastated as Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So in looking at the aftermath, they weren't really even realizing that there was like this bomb of a completely different nature that had, been invented. They didn't know that till later, actually. Right. And I think post Nagasaki, there was they were busily creating 3 or 4 more deliverable bombs that they were planning to deploy against Japan. And who was it that ultimately put a stop to that? Oh, I think it was probably Truman. Truman said enough. 2 is enough.
Well, there's a great biography. It's called American Prometheus, about Oppenheimer, where Oppenheimer, after the first one, he felt like very ashamed of himself, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. Right. So he kind of instructed him on what to do with the wind and everything for the second one, but he really didn't want anything part of it. And then they came after him because he didn't want to have anything to do with the hydrogen bomb projects, and that's why they, eventually went after him. So, yeah,
and he, I've learned some new things about Oppenheimer recently, and some of the other things that he's so connected with the bomb, and we don't realize he was interested in other things, but he was interested in all kinds of alternative forms of energy, and there's the famous quote from the Mahabharata that is attributed to him, and he was interested in things ancient. And somewhere scattered throughout things that he said and wrote, and I don't have the sources, but I'm looking into it, he made such things that would lead one to believe that he thought that there may be much more to human history than, the conventional academic model. And some of the stuff that he
talks about all that, the Vedas. Like if you read this book, American Prometheus, he goes through like all of his Eastern philosophy stuff. It's really good. But you're right. I mean, I've definitely, I don't know why, but I was very fascinated with Oppenheimer for a few months there, and just read everything I could on him. So,
well, he was a fascinating individual.
Yeah, we did a nice episode on that.
You guys did an episode on that?
Yeah, we started this series called Paradigm Shifters, where we're going to pick out people where we think they've left a huge impact on civilization and society, and he's the first person that I picked because, I think it's a huge paradigm shift for war, for energy, for all that kind of stuff. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But it's appropriate that we'd be talking about the atomic bombings and all that, because there's actually. The subject we were going to kind of address, I think, was going to be catastrophism. And I think we've talked about that before. And, there's constantly new things being cut every month. New information is coming to light, to quote the great Lebowski. But it's true every month. Every few months, there's stuff comes out that you go, wow, okay. So, this whole Younger Dryas boundary question, when it was first proposed, it was attacked, rigorously by all the pseudo-skeptics who just didn't want to accept the fact that, hey, it wasn't, Paleo-Indian hunters with loincloths and Birkenstocks wiping out the woolly mammoths. It may have been something from space. They didn't want to go there because the belief was becoming entrenched that, it was humans, Now, never mind if you look at most of the models of human population growth during the Paleolithic period, which could be the late Ice Age. If you're looking in geological terms, the period, say, like at 15 to 20,000 years ago, most of the estimates of population that I've seen in the studies put it between 5 and 10 million people worldwide. I don't necessarily know if that's true, but it's, there's one could ask, call that into question for various reasons. But nonetheless, I mean, based on the hard evidence in the fossil record and the dispersal of people and the estimates of population density worldwide and so on, I mean, they've come up with a reasonable estimate that may be 10 million people. And I do, you got to ask several questions when when that number is put out. One being, well, we know that there were modern humans that, for all we can tell, were not much different than we today, leaving their little bits and pieces of their skeletal remains behind. They're going back 150 to 200,000 years now. So if we had modern humans, which presume a modern human means, 1,100 cubic centimeter cranial capacity, something, that's going to be equivalent to an intelligent brain today, well, then we can assume these people would have been intellectually not necessarily our inferiors. But then here's the question. I mean, how could you go for those tens of thousands of years? And what, did the population remain steady? Did it wax and wane? Were there times when the population increased and then crashed? And I think the answer that we're moving towards is, yeah. I mean, we were the planet was in the grip of this ice age, and the ice age was not just brought about by some kind of subtle conditions that slowly shifted over, hundreds of millennia and would have given people plenty of time to adapt. I think the record now of climate change and environmental change and all of that, global change, if you want to use a more comprehensive term, shows that the climate for the last couple of million years has been extremely dynamic. I mean, extremely dynamic. And you have to think, well, how it has to be dynamic. If you go back 15,000 years ago, which in the geological framework is just a mere eye blink, you think of history, okay, in round numbers, let's say 5,000 years, that's history. If we double history back, we're at the beginnings of the transition from nomadic to sedentary lifestyles. We're seeing, the emergence of farming, on a significant scale. We're seeing the dispersal of languages. We're seeing the domestication of animals. We're seeing the first urban complexes. All of this is going down, 8 to 10,000 years ago, right? So now, of course, this is coming just immediately in the wake of the Great Ice Age. Now, the modern geological epoch, called the Holocene, is now dated at 11,600 years. And what's interesting, there's several things interesting about that. Number one, the date of 11,600 for the inception of the Holocene, the current modern geological epoch. Turns out that that's the upper Younger Dryas boundary. You guys now obviously know about the Younger Dryas, right? There's the lower boundary. The Younger.
I think I've heard about that.
I've heard about the older Dryas, but I thought that was Maurice.
I'm very dry, I'll tell you that.
Well, there is a joke that goes along with that, but I won't say it. So,
all right.
But
we want to hear it.
Well,
save it for the Patreon.
Okay, all right.
There we go.
Well, sometimes the Younger Dryas gets mispronounced a little bit. So there's the older Dryas and the Younger Dryas.
Oh my Lord.
And it goes from there. But like I said, we'll leave it at that. But yes, obviously, because we're saying the Younger Dryas, there's an implication there that there's an older Dryas, which there is. There's an older Dryas. And then that was followed by two climatic stages called the Balling and the Alarod. So you had older Dryas, Balling, Alarod, Younger Dryas, Pre-Boreal. That was the sequence. The transition from Younger Dryas to Pre-Boreal, that was the transition from Pleistocene epoch to Holocene epoch. Now, the question could naturally be asked, given that the duration of the Pleistocene is now given at over 2.5 million years, and the duration of the Holocene, the whole recent, is 11,600 years. So is the Holocene really a distinct and separate epoch? or is it just a stage within the Pleistocene? That's an important question, because what characterizes the Pleistocene, say, for example, when contrasted with the previous geological epoch, the Pliocene, is the variability of climate and the oscillation between glacial and interglacial ages, which seemed to inflict itself upon this planet roughly around 2.5 million years ago. And so how many glacial, interglacial transitions were there? I don't think anybody has got a final number. The problem being is that each transition tends to obscure and erase the evidence of the previous transitions. But that can be teased out of the geological record with careful examination. But here's the point I guess I'm getting at, is that when you look at the transition out of the Ice Age, you have the lower Younger Dryas boundary, which is dated at about roughly 12,850 to 12,900 years ago. I think that the final date now that they've been honing in on is just over 12,850 years ago. Okay, that's the lower Younger Dryas boundary. And what happened there is that for the previous 1,000 or 1,500 years, the climate had been gradually warming out of the depths of the bitter cold of the late glacial maximum, which would have been 17 to 21,000 years ago, say, and what an astrologer would think of as the age of Scorpio, the age of death, which you're going to be in if you go back 18,000 years. Age of Scorpio, in other words, meaning the vernal equinox at that time was transiting through the constellation of the Scorpion, right? So then it comes up, eventually works its way around, and you get to Virgo. And Virgo was that period of relative warmth that would be consistent with the Milankovitch forcing mechanisms. I don't know if you know what that is. I'll explain it very quickly. Milankovitch was Milutin Milankovitch, I think, what was he, Yugoslavian? I don't remember. He was a mathematician, and he was the one who first realized that there were three factors affecting the amount of solar radiation that reached the surface of the Earth. It was the shape of the Earth's orbit. It was the tilt of its axis, which varied somewhat, and it was its distance from the sun during perihelion and aphelion. So by looking at those three things, he realized that it could actually induce slowly accumulating changes. Sometimes those changes would cancel each other out. Other times they would amplify each other. So now, when we go back to the end of the last ice age, we were in a phase where the Milankovitch forces, which is, again, just are very slow. They're going to be slow, accumulative, very incremental, something that's taking place over centuries to millennia, right? Well, at the end of the Ice Age, you had this warming during the Baaling Alarad, and that warming was consistent with Milankovitch warming, okay, which would have been because of the changing Earth-Sun geometry. There would have been a natural, gradual, gentle warming. That's what we see at the end of the last Ice Age for a couple of thousand years anyway. So now we get down to 12,000, I'm just call just round number, 12,900 years ago. Okay, boom, something happens, right? And all of a sudden, literally within almost like an instant, a year, 5 years certainly, no more than that, maybe even less than a year, the whole 2,000 to 3,000 years of gradually accumulating warmth is erased in an instant. And now you have the return of full glacial cold during the early phase of the Younger Dryas. So now this is the Younger Dryas, lower Younger Dryas boundary. This is where a lot of the megafaunal remains cease. In other words, below this thin layer that marks the transition from Pleistocene to Holocene, from the Baaling Alarad into the Younger Dryas, has that layer. And that layer has a lot of interesting stuff in it. And the first thing that called attention to that layer was two things. One, the abundant megafaunal remains that were found below that layer, and the scarcity of the same megafaunal remains that were found above the layer, right? The other thing was the presence of evidence of the Clovis culture, of human habitation of the non-glaciated North American continent. So that was the Clovis culture, right? That suddenly appeared like around 13,300 years ago, 13,400, and then even quicker disappeared. They came. They were very active. There was over
I mentioned
50.
Last time you were on, I brought up that new find that they found in St. Joseph's County, Michigan. Some guy found a 15,000-year-old Clovis tool, which they thought was super crazy because that was supposed to be under ice. So what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? And if it is actually dated to 15,000 years ago, that makes it an outlier because most of the Clovis artifacts have been dated at no later than 13,300, 13,400 years ago.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and find that paper. And I'll try and add the link down below after we're done.
Okay. Is Maurice the research man as we're raising questions?
He's supposed to be, he's supposed to be our young Jamie, but he's more like old Dryas.
Okay.
Old.
Well, give that man a shot at
baby powder over here, folks.
Well, in my Cosmographia podcast, Kyle Allen, he's one of the Snake brothers, Serpent brothers at Hell's
we know
Cove.
Kyle.
Yeah, I'm grooming him into my fact checker.
There you go.
So yeah, he's doing a pretty good job though. But I oftentimes, Kyle, would you look that up for us? Whereas I need somebody in the background who's constantly, everything we say, okay, blah, 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 fact checking that. So that upper transition now, so now you got roughly 1,300 years, right? Which actually might be a little bit less than that, which dates it to around 1,290 years ago, right? I mean, the duration of the Younger Dryas, about 1,290 years. So it's about 1/10 the time from now back to the beginning of the Younger Dryas. So in other words, if you mark from the bottom, the onset of the Younger Dryas to now, 1/10 of that span of time is the Younger Dryas. Very, very, very close. So then you have the upper boundary. The other thing is the lower boundary does not have one of the CRE events associated with it, but the upper boundary does. Now, do you know what a CRE event is? Actually, a CRE. It's redundant to say CRE event. CRE means a catastrophic rise event. And this is the term for these sudden jumps in sea level that occurred during the glacial meltdown. Catastrophic rise events. And there were two of them that were documented. The earliest first one is dated at 14,500 years ago. And that's called Meltwater Pulse 1A. The second one is dated at 11,600 years ago. It is called Meltwater Pulse 1B. Now, there's evidence that there's also major meltwater floods that occurred right at the Younger Dryas boundary at, say, 12,900 years. Not enough to where the marine geologists and the oceanographers have documented a substantial meltwater pulse at that date. But I think perhaps if we take a closer look, we may find that evidence. Because here's the problem. You figure sea level during late glacial maximum is at least 400 feet lower, right? So now you're having this very rapid influx of glacial meltwater into the ocean basins of the world. And so sea level is rising, and it's rising substantially faster than anything we've seen in the last century or two, right? Substantially faster. And then within that rise of 400 feet, that's not necessarily a uniform linear process. There are points within that process where it makes jumps, right? Which means that there were melting events. There had to be very rapid melting of the ice sheet. Now, the one problem that we stumble upon when we start looking at this is that in order for there to be a melting event, in order to convert ice into water, it requires energy. In some form, thermal energy, it has to come from somewhere, right? Now, we can look at, say, Greenland, and, a lot of concern about Greenland ice mass melting, and it's an exaggerated concern because Greenland, if you look at the long-term study, suggests that it's a whole lot more stable than it's being portrayed in the recent media. Consider Antarctica. Now, there's between 5 and 6 million cubic miles of ice piled up on the South Pole, right? Now, we don't see melting events where discharges of meltwater are coming off the Antarctic ice sheet that can only be measured in hundreds of millions of cubic feet per second. If we saw something like that, of course, the eco warriors and the environmentalists and all, they would be absolutely going hysterical. We don't see anything like that at all. In fact, it doesn't appear that the mass balance of Antarctic ice sheet is changing much at all. There is some change in that West Antarctic peninsula that's coming out, but that's induced by subglacial volcanism, and it doesn't really have anything to do with a warming atmosphere. But overall, the mass of Antarctica is quite stable. We don't see meltwater. There's seasonal meltwater around the periphery, just like there's seasonal meltwater in Greenland, right? And that, when you measure it by, human day-to-day standards, it sounds like it's a whole lot of water, and it is, but it's, fully replenished with each winter's snowfall, and the ice builds up, and then, of course, you're going to have surface melting, right? But here's what I'm getting at. You got a picture in your head, a huge ice sheet, bigger than the one that now covers the South Pole, covering half of North America, reaches from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the northern United States up to the Arctic Circle. It's up to 1.5 miles thick, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 feet thick over the central dome. 6 million, roughly 6 million cubic miles of ice. And then you've got another ice sheet over northwestern Europe that's bigger than the one that now covers Greenland. It's called the Fennoscandian ice sheet. Now, there was a whole lot of ice in the world at that time. Well, according to any standard model of global change, and especially if you're trying to attribute the existence of the glaciers to these Milankovitch forces, there's no way that you're going to be generating meltwater pulses that are measured in hundreds of millions of cubic feet per second discharging off the ice sheet. Yet we know for a fact that the meltdown of the Great Laurentide Cordilleran ice sheet complex covering North America had discharges of meltwater up to that level, maybe even exceeding 1 billion cubic feet per second. Now, do you know what that means in some kind of terms that you can grasp? Think of this, guys. Think of all your continent. You're not excluding Antarctica. Think of North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Australia. Think of all the great rivers of the world. Just think of North America. What are the great rivers? Obviously, Mississippi and Missouri, the Ohio, the Columbia, the Mackenzie. We could go on, the Colorado, the Hudson, the Connecticut, all of these rivers. Then you start thinking about the great rivers of South America, the Amazon, the Orinoco, dozens of other great rivers. Think about it, rivers in Africa, right? The Congo, the Nile. Go to Europe, you've got the Rhine, the Rhone, you've got the Thames, on and on and on, the Yellow River in China. And we're just scratching the surface. You think of every river on Earth, right? If you take the flow, the discharge of every single river now flowing on planet Earth, combine them together, it wouldn't even be 1/10 of some of the meltwater flows coming off of the Great Laurentide ice sheet and Cordilleran ice sheets. How do you explain that? See, that kind of puts it in some effort to put this thing into perspective.
Yeah.
And I don't think that modern science has figured it out yet.
I mean, honestly, I think you do a really good job of breaking this stuff down, because I don't know how many people out there can actually look at these scientific papers, read them, understand them, and then kind of translate them and convey them to your everyman or every woman, and help them understand the magnitude of what these shifts were and everything that happened. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really hard to grasp. I do want to point out, though, I was wrong. You were right, even though you'd never heard about it. It says independent researcher Thomas Talbot and researchers from the University of Michigan have discovered 13,000-year-old Clovis campsite in St. Joseph's County. Was thought to be the earliest archaeological site located in Michigan.
Okay, well, that's good. So I have been redeemed. My credibility has been restored.
I wish I was right, but you're right.
Well, I don't know, Mike.
Give credit where credit's
I don't know. When I signed up for this gig, man.
But yeah, man, I mean, that's one thing that I think most archaeologists and geologists and scientists lack, is that ability to connect with people and that ability to translate the data and the science in a way that people can understand. I think that's the biggest flaw out there right now with social media and technology.
Well, yeah, and there is barriers. I mean, the barriers, language barriers, because it takes some time to learn the lingo. I mean, there's a lot of terms that I just now thoroughly understand. If you talk about a paleocurrent indicator, what the hell am I talking about? If I mention a streamlined erosional residual, what the hell am I talking about? Well, there was once upon a time I'm going, streamlined erosional residual, what the hell are they talking about, right? Well, then I go, I get out my trusty geological dictionary. I see if it's in there. If it's not, I read stuff, and I'm a note taker. I take notes when I'm reading, right? And I'm a highlighter. And I'm constantly looking stuff up, constantly. So sometimes I'll start and I'll read a scientific paper on some subject that I don't know much about, and I get through it and I go, okay, I might have gotten the gist of that, but boy, there was about 90% of it that was over my head. I will literally read some papers 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And each time I'm okay. And I've discovered that a lot of it is just learning the terminology that they're using. Oh, okay. I know what he's talking about there. I get that now. So that's a big part of it. And a lot of people get put off by that. I mean, but for anybody who's a sincere researcher, that's part of the fun to me, is like learning a new term.
Yeah.
Totally.
What is an orogeny?
Don't you think they could add like a little term key on scientific papers?
Like some of them do that now, Mike.
Do they?
Yes, some of them actually do that, and they'll actually put a little box in, and it'll be like explained in layman's terms.
Yeah, I mean, we've done episodes on philosophy, and like there's people don't know what interlocutor is and different terminology and stuff. So I always add a whole list before we get into it. We did a super volcano, explosivity index, and went through all that so people know, like, before we do the episode, when I talk about this is what I'm talking about, kind of a thing. So
good. Yeah, that helps people learn. And I mean, a lot of people they're not there in that. There's some of us, I think, like probably both you guys, myself, most of the circles we travel in and associate with, these are people who are really curious, constantly asking questions, who love to learn new things.
Nerds,
and
just say it.
Nerds. Basically nerds. Nerds, yeah, nerds, exactly. I didn't want to, I didn't want to say anything that would be offensive to Maurice, so I
don't know if Maurice is a nerd. He's a little too cool, I think.
They call me Poindexter.
Poindexter, and I often say to people, now don't be a Poindexter. Stop being a Poindexter.
But in terms of like, in terms of going back to what we were talking about, what you were just explaining, how fast, like roughly time-wise, do you think that all happened? It went from these large glacial sheets to everything melted. Like how roughly what's the time frame for that?
5,000 years.
5,000 years.
Yeah,
okay.
But see, within that, now you're talking about endpoints of a continuum.
These little micro things, these micro events.
There were, again, it was not a linear process. It was not a smooth process. It was a series. My take of it now is that there was a series of closely bunched catastrophes, and that happened sequentially. And I mentioned meltwater pulse 1A that's dated at 14,500 years ago. It looks to me like, if that date holds up, and I haven't seen anything to question that date, that seems like the very first big meltwater pulse. And some of the carvings of the great coulees and canyons and valleys and things that were near the great ice sheets occurred at that point. Then there is a clearly well-documented second meltwater pulse at 11,600, which again, we correlated that with the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene. If you look up right now, Holocene, I bet you'll see it'll give the date of 11,600 years. Okay, which is interesting, and here's why. As being a student of Plato, we talked about Atlantis last time. Well, Plato is very explicit about the destruction of Atlantis, which he attributes to a subsidence caused by a big earthquake, right? If you read how he explains it, right? Well, he gives that date very precisely as 9,000 years before Solon's journey to Egypt, which occurred in 600 BC, give or take a decade or so. Well, so then you do the numbers, do the math. 600 BC is 2,600 years ago. Add that to the 9,000 years prior to that sojourn in Egypt, and you're at 11,600 years. So, interesting.
Which puts us at Göbekli Tepe.
Which puts us at Göbekli Tepe, which is another interesting wrinkle in this whole emerging paradigm shift that we see going on. Yes. Could there be a connection? Absolutely, I would think there could be a connection, because I do think that the events that terminated the Ice Age were global in extent. I mean, regionally, they were more severe in some places than others, because obviously, for example, people survived, megafauna survived, where in other places, large swaths of geography were, megafauna and human were apparently completely erased from certain regions. I mean, post Younger Dryas, there is no Clovis. Clovis are gone. And it's like half a millennia, really, before the Folsom culture starts showing up. Now, they're arguing about the transition between Clovis and Folsom. I don't know. I don't know the resolution of that, but it seems that there's a lot of evidence of at least a multi-century abandonment of large areas of North American geography in the wake of the Younger Dryas event. And then human remains show up again after this hiatus. And
what do you think about Derinkuyu? Because, Turkey's kind of interesting because it does have all these sites. You've got Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe. You've got all these super old sites. And then they're saying Derinkuyu, this underground cave system that housed 20, 30,000 people at one point, was from the 7th century BC. Why would they have created that for then versus what we're talking about?
Well, perhaps something going on in the sky.
Yeah.
That'd be my first thought.
I know there's a myth. Was that Yima and the Vara? Is that Zoroastrianism, where they come out and it's snowing or something like that? I don't know. I don't want to jump around too much, but yeah, I find these connections interesting because the dating on some of these things, it's they're like, oh, we think it's this, but and then when you kind of push back on these timelines, it's that's pseudoscience or whatever, but at the same time, it doesn't make sense. And, from the standpoint of to create something like that underground for 20, 30,000 people, I would assume it would have to be some sort of serious event, right?
One would think.
Yeah. So.
And this is in Turkey. Yeah. The great. I haven't really looked into that yet, Mike, to the extent where I can give any kind of authoritative opinion on it. I try.
And that's what I love about you, man. You don't dabble in things you don't know. I know you know what you don't know. That's the most important thing.
Well, yeah, I know a few things that a lot of people don't know, and I'll brag about that. But this is something that I would actually. That's one of those things that I would love to investigate further. There's just a lot, so I'm. That's why it's great for me to be able to communicate with other people who are investigating and doing research and stuff, because I get to learn a lot of the stuff that, if I was 3 people instead of just one, I could probably investigate all of the things that I'm interested in.
Yeah. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right?
Yeah.
Amen.
I am only one guy.
You do look like God if we were anthropomorphizing him,
Well, I have been carefully cutting my Lord-like countenance. The promo that has just gone up for this Halloween Festival of the Dead thing I'm doing on Sunday, which, by the way, I hope you guys can tune in. If not, it's going to get recorded and it's going to be available in perpetuity. But it's got some juicy stuff in it. And the headshot that they're using, somebody said that, and I said, no, I think it looks more like Orson Welles in his, his old age.
Yeah, I can see. You actually do look like
the later years of Orson.
You do. If somebody made a statue of you, I'd be like, "That's an old Greek philosopher right there." So I think that's a compliment. That's a compliment.
Depends if his shirt's off or not.
Well, I'm not as buff as I used to be, so if I was, I probably would be sitting here without my shirt on.
There you
go.
Yeah. Matt actually just asked, which meltwater pulse event is the one that really trashed North America?
That's a really good question. Who asked that?
Matt. Thank you, Matt.
Matt, and the answer to Matt is, I don't know. I think actually it was a couple of them. I think we had, and you can't get rid of all of that ice without trashing large parts of North America. I mean, think about this. Every river that headed off the margin of the ice sheet, which would be all the rivers in the northern United States. I mean, if you start going to New England, the Hudson River and the Connecticut River both were occupied troughs that were carved out by glacial meltwater. Same with the Mississippi, same with the Ohio, same with the Missouris, the Columbia River as well. All of these great river systems, which comprise a lot of the watershed and catchment basins of northern United States, were carved by huge meltwater discharges. The dating of that is really one of the issues that people are working on right now, Matt, to try to decipher that. And I'm of the mind that the first real massive flooding that we can now see etched into the landscape of North America occurred at 14,500 years ago, coincident with meltwater pulse 1A. Now, if we go to 12,800 years ago, 12,900 years ago at the lower Younger Dryas boundary, there's no documented meltwater pulse from studies of the ocean at that date. However, there is new research suggesting that there was gigantic meltwater pulses into the Arctic Ocean. Now, that water ultimately would have ended up in the North Atlantic, no question. But eastern Laurentide ice sheet, that meltwater is going to go discharge directly into the Atlantic. Northern Laurentide is going to discharge into the Arctic. Western Cordilleran ice sheet is going to discharge mostly into the Pacific. But the meltwater discharging south off of the rims of the ice sheet, if you're west of the Continental Divide, that meltwater ended up pretty much flowing to the Pacific via what is now the Columbia River Valley. Now, when you get into the southern United States, some of the rivers, you have the Arkansas River, the Rio Grande, the Colorado River. Over in the eastern, you have the Savannah River and those rivers. Well, now you can't see the evidence of catastrophe as spectacularly preserved because the evidence of the catastrophe is a function of how much energy, how much force is being, imposed upon the land by the passage of that water. That's going to be a function of how fast the water is moving, primarily. It's a function also of total volume, but the faster the water is moving, the more erosive it is. So when you have, like out in the western United States, the Pacific Northwest, like I was just out there last month for a couple of weeks exploring the so-called Channel Scablands, which are some of the most spectacular water-carved features on Earth, right? You have gigantic abandoned cataracts that are many, many times just completely would swallow up Niagara, right? And now they're completely dry. But
is that where you filmed with Graham? I saw like a picture from, I don't know if it was from the Ancient Apocalypse or not, but it looked like a picture of you and Graham from the Scablands.
Probably was, because that's what we did. We see when Graham was researching Magicians of the Gods, we spent a couple of weeks traversing from Portland to Minneapolis. And what we did was we generally followed the southern boundary of the ice sheet. So what I was showing, Graham, was the evidence for these gigantic meltwater pulses that were discharging off the ice sheet. Now, if you come to the mid-continental United States and you're looking at the headwaters of, say, the Mississippi, you got, what is it, 1,100 miles, something like that, from the margin, 1,000 miles from where the margin of the ice sheet was to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, you go to the Pacific Northwest, eastern Washington, you've got a couple of 100 miles from the margin of the ice sheet to the Pacific. So basically, you think about that, what the implication is out in those Pacific Northwestern environments, you've got a much steeper gradient. And so that means the water's moving faster. The total volume may not be any greater, but when you speed that water up, its erosive potential begins to increase exponentially, see? So sometimes even a 2-foot flash flood could wash away a car if it's moving fast enough, you know? So it's a question of velocity. Now, I think, let me go back to Matt's question. The first meltwater pulse, where did that water come from? That's one of the unresolved questions right now. It presumably came primarily from the North American ice complex. What was the contribution of the Northern European ice complex, the so-called Fennoscandian ice sheet, right? Some terminology. You've got 3 named ice sheets during that late glacial maximum. Fennoscandian, like as in Scandinavia, Fenno, like Finland, Fennoscandian. Then you come over to North, that's the European. You come over to North American, you've got the Laurentide, which is the big one that's centered over Hudson Bay, Canada, and up to 1.5 miles thick. And then when you come over west to the Canadian Rockies, you've got the Cordilleran ice sheet. And you can think of the Cordilleran ice sheet as roughly the size of the ice sheet that now covers Greenland, and and the Laurentide ice sheet roughly the size of the one that now covers Antarctica. And you take those 2 ice sheets and you drop them on North America, now you got the late glacial maximum. So one of the questions, the sticky questions right now, is the precise sequence of events that brought us from full glacial maximum, which we know we were at 15,000 years ago, pretty much, to full-on interglacial like we are now, which 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. Now, within there, it appears that what you had was a very rapid melting initially that launched the thing. It slowed down, and then there was a second episode of melting, like the Mackenzie River. If you pull up a Google Earth map and you look at the Mackenzie River, it has all of those scabland features that were created by gigantic floods rushing north into the Arctic Ocean. That seems to now be dated to the Younger Dryas boundary. Also, the question of Lake Agassiz, which was a gigantic inland sea of meltwater that literally was so big it would have taken days to sail across if you could have. You wouldn't have been able to see from one side to the other. And I've begun to question whether that was actually even a lake. And not just a temporary gigantic pool of meltwater. But it discharged north into the Arctic Ocean, and it apparently discharged south at a place called Big Stone Lake, which is right on the boundary of Minnesota and South Dakota. And then that fed into and carved what is now the Minnesota River Valley. And that fed into the Mississippi, right? And the Minnesota River Valley I've told that story about how when I was a punk 18-year-old in the summer of 1969 at a rock concert out at Flying Cloud Airport on the bluffs overlooking the Minnesota River Valley, I wandered over, the bluffs are a couple of 100 feet high, and I wandered over and was standing there, probably zoned out of my mind, probably. Otherwise, I might have not even noticed it. But I was I'm standing on the bluff. Down below is the Minnesota River. And the Minnesota River had 2 embankments on each side. 3 miles across, there was another set of bluffs. They were like the matching partner of the set of bluffs I was standing on. And I just remember looking up and down and then looking at the Minnesota River that had meandered over to my side of this much, much bigger channel. And I just had this impression stuck with me for years. And it was only 8 or 10 years later that I actually started thinking. I thought back to that impression I had, and it was not an impression that I had anything specific other than it was kind of an impression of scale invariance. And now, in fact, maybe just for the heck of it, I will pull up Google Maps and I'll show you that, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, this is a case of an underfit stream, it's called. An underfit stream or underfit river is where you have a river flowing in a channel that's way too big for the river. Let me put on my terrain, my 3D terrain here, and I will show you.
And if anybody's interested in hearing more about Randall being zoned out in the 60s and 70s, we've talked about psychedelics and stuff in past episodes with them, so go listen to those if you're interested.
Someday I'll have full.
Guy really likes to plug away, baby.
Someday I will have full disclosure.
Yeah,
but that's probably not until I know that I'm going to be checking out soon. Then nobody can hold me accountable.
You and Graham have to go on Rogan and just get wild with it.
I've heard a few stories, and I'm not going to relate to any of those stories, but yeah, Graham was a young man at once upon a time. Let's see now, how can I, this is a little bit tricky. I'm not used to this software. I mean, this screen sharing software. So let me see what I can do here. Okay, there's Google Maps. Okay, I've got Google Maps up. Okay, and I had it open. Let me see. I guess what I can do is drag it to my other monitor. I think that's how it's going to work. Let's try share. Yes. Are we seeing a map?
Yes.
Yes, we are, sir.
Excelente. Okay, so right here, I'm going to probably, am I zooming? I don't want to zoom too fast. Here's Flying Cloud Airport, right? Do you see that?
Here, I can make this the main thing.
Okay, yeah, you should do that. There we go. Right here, Flying Cloud Airport. Take that. And you see there's this gully right over here. Okay, now I was standing right here. This was they used to have rock concerts in the, Saturday, Sunday, I don't remember what day this was, over here at the airport. And the bluff is pretty flat up here, and that's why it's a good place for an airport, because it's got this flat area right here. And I was standing right here looking out. And if I zoom out here, you will begin to see that on the other side over here, there's another set of bluffs.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And it's flat in here. That's the whole floodplain of the modern Minnesota River. And I'm going to come on over. Let's see, zoom out a little more. And I will come on over. And we'll just follow. And you can see there's this very large channel.
Yeah.
And the modern Minnesota River did not create this channel. The modern Minnesota River is simply exploiting what was already there, which makes sense because, look, you got 200 feet elevation change between the floor of this channel and the top of the upland.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that river there looks like a little trickle compared to what would have caused that.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it's actually a big major river.
Yeah.
See? Well, this was actually, now geologists have identified that this was a meltwater river. They call it Glacial River Warren, and you can see, you can follow. This is an example, guys, of an underfit river. This is a new term you can add to your vocabulary to impress your friends. And we can see we're following it, and you can see here, look at this. This is a fossil channel. It was created by glacial meltwater, and of course there is no glacial meltwater anymore. Look at here, you can see channels within channels. See, and this is all alluvium that forms the floor. So I'm going to zoom out, hopefully, and you can see it makes a big bend here at Mankato, comes around like this, and you can trace. I mean, the signature of this gigantic flow is very obvious, isn't it? You can't miss it. Well, here's the thing, just to give you a sense of the scale again. Glacial River Warren at peak discharge was 4,000 times greater than the modern Minnesota River that's flowing in the channel.
Wow.
4,000 times. And so if I keep going here, you can just follow it. So you can follow the trace of the flood, which is really a cool thing.
Yeah.
But I'm going to zoom out here, and I'm going to go right up here. There's the Minnesota-South Dakota border. And I'm going to zoom out, and then I'll zoom back in. And let's see, where are we at here? We're now probably Ortonville. Here we go. So right in here, we have a series of lakes, and the discharge point. Notice here the name of this, Big Stone City.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Big Stone Lake. Well, there's a little clue for you right there. Big Stone. And in fact, this was the southern outlet of Glacial Lake Agassiz right here, which was this gigantic lake that reached way up into Canada and was completely submerged, this landscape here, all the way up. And now, when you look at Minnesota, and I'm going to zoom in there.
1 million lakes. Where did they, Maurice, didn't you go to that festival?
10,000 Lakes.
Yeah, 10,000 Lakes Music Festival. Where was that at?
I mean, it was in Minnesota, but
you don't remember.
Those were back in my hazy days. I went up there with this band called Bump, and I went on their tour bus. And again, I was
and
sitting
you were
in the
doing
back.
bumps apparently.
I was sitting in the back on a cooler. I had no idea where I was and what I was doing. But yeah, no, it's crazy when you look at the map. There really is 10,000.
That looks familiar.
Hey.
Yeah. Well, we're looking at Michigan here, and I just thought I'd show you something. Grand Rapids, the town.
Yeah.
Oh, we know Grand Rapids.
Oh, do you?
We're from
where
Michigan.
Are you guys located?
Well, we're from outside Detroit, but I mean, we've been all over the state.
Well, check this out. The Grand River right here is flowing in Grand Valley.
Yeah.
Well, check this out. Grand Valley, you got an underfit river condition right there.
Wow.
You can see it very clearly on this map.
Yeah, it looks very similar.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And look at this. Look at this feature right here. Now this would have temporarily been an island within the stream. That is what you would call, get this done. Now this is really a term that you can impress your friends with. A streamlined erosional residual. I love that term.
Say that to a
Maurice
friend,
still
slap
can't even
you in
say
the face.
To who? Say that to who? Yeah, there are probably people out there that you would not want to say that to.
That's what I'm saying.
Matt actually wanted to follow up. He said there, so just so he gets it right, based on what you were explaining, there was 2 major melting events in that 5,000-year period, and he said that they were relatively close together, correct?
One of them, Meltwater Pulse 1A, is at 14,500 years ago. Meltwater Pulse 1B is 11,600. And I'm proposing the possibility of a third meltwater pulse at 12,900. And if I turn out to be right in the long run, then there would have been 3 meltwater events, 3 melting events, which then raises the question, of course, that I was getting around to circuitously earlier, which was what would trigger such melting events. And I have basically 2 ideas, and I lean more towards one than the other, but we can talk about that. So there's Grand Rapids, and
yeah, we got to get you up in Michigan doing some, because I mean, I love Michigan, but there's some interesting stuff. They're finding underwater stone sites in the Huron Straits up there at the top.
Yeah,
they're finding. I told you there's that underwater stone site in Travers Bay where there's a mastodon carved into one of the stones.
Yeah, and check this out. Now I'm going to zoom in on upper Michigan right here around this little town of Ellsworth where my cursor is, and I'm going to zoom in, and watch carefully what emerges out of the blurred. Look at that. That's a drumlin swarm.
Wow.
Now, you know what a drumlin swarm is? You know what drumlins are? They're controversial, but I think John Shaw, one of the great geologists who passed away about, 5 or 6 years ago, expert on drumlins. He did work on some of the spectacular drumlin fields around the earth, around North America primarily. And they're always associated with glaciers because everywhere there were drumlins, there were glaciers. But they've been arguing what causes the formation of these unique landscapes. Let me see. Let me pull out and I'll show you one of the really spectacular, one of the most spectacular.
There's some awesome sites, man. You should look into this there's Beaver Island. There's like a stone circle thing on Beaver Island that Northern Michigan University has been studying for a while. There's Beaver Island, there's Drummond Island. There's a lot of cool places off the coast of Michigan.
Yeah, I know that. And there's even stuff being found, under the surface of the Great Lakes.
Absolutely.
But, those things, I think, would, of course, all been post-glacial. I don't think any of those were, prior to the end of the Ice Age, because if they weren't destroyed by the ice, they would have been destroyed by the meltwater, which pretty much submerged very large areas of the non-glaciated North American continent. I'm going over here near Rochester, New York, by the Finger Lakes. And I'm going to zoom in on this area between the northern end of the Finger Lakes and the southern shoreline of Lake Ontario. And
we've been to Rochester on our way to a fish festival, and let me tell you, the woods there, very bizarre. Got Mortal Kombat vibes. Like the very straight trees. You can see through them very clearly. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I definitely had a psychedelic experience there. So, but Rochester's, I like the woods there, but yeah, very bizarre.
Yeah. This whole landscape is bizarre for multiple reasons, but I'm going to zoom in and you're going to see what reveals itself.
More drumlins.
Spectacular drumlins. And what characterizes drumlins is this inverted boat hull sort of geometry. And they tend to be, we zoom in here, they tend to be more pointed on the upstream end and blunter on the downstream end. And look, right here, what do you see right here? You see an underfit river. And notice how the channel of that underfit river is truncating the tips of these drumlins right here. You see that? So what that tells us is that the drumlins were first, and then this meltwater channel was second. So the drumlins, what Shaw's idea was, and I think he was right, is the drumlins are formed by massive subglacial water flows. In other words, water flowing on the bottom of the glaciers. The problem with people accepting that theory was that the volumes of the drumlin swarms themselves are so vast on such a grand scale that the water volumes involved in their creation had to have been extraordinary. And nobody has been wanting to go there. So his ideas haven't gained acceptance within the mainstream geological community, only because the sources of such huge meltwater was just beyond the paradigm, was outside the paradigm. I think he was totally right, though. I mean, I think that there's a lot of evidence. I've been to many of these drumlin fields. I've been to this one. I've been to drumlin fields up in Canada. I've been out in the field. My colleague Bradley Young and I have been out. We spent 4 days with Jerome Lesman, who we've had twice on our podcast, learning about drumlins. He was a graduate student under John Shaw and co-authored a paper with him in 1999 that was entitled Channel Scabland Back to Brett's. And we can circle back to what he's talking about there in the title of that paper. But
now, so are you Jerome in contact with any academics or any geologists or anything that you're friendly with, but maybe they disagree and on any of these things, or are you just so well researched that a lot of these people don't even know what the hell you're talking about?
Well, Jerome. I mean, certainly Jerome he's a professor of geology at Vancouver Island University, and he's one of the tops in his field. I mean, I think he's probably one of the foremost geologists in the world that have studied drumlins. So, we've had him on the podcast twice. Bradley and I spent 4 days out in the field with him, researching drumlins firsthand, up in British Columbia. And, I'm convinced that, they're produced by subglacial water flows. So you got a picture when a glacier comes across the landscape, it pulverizes the bedrock and the ground beneath it and churns it up into what's called glacial till. And just think of that pulverized rock, which it can be hundreds of feet thick below the glacier, right? Well, this is what's created by the glacier itself, and there's no real structure to it. One of the defining characteristics of a glacier deposit is this lack of structure, no bedding, whereas water deposits will have structure. They will display, bedding planes, they will have layering and that kind of stuff. And so if a deposit has structure, it's going to be alluvial or fluvial in origin, meaning flowing water. If there's absolutely no structure, it's going to be glacial till, which has not been in any way sorted or shaped by flowing water. However, drumlins are clearly, in my mind, streamlined. They're formed by flowing water, exactly what you would expect. And the geometry of drumlins is very aerodynamic. In other words, if you design a ship, the hull of a ship is designed to minimize friction passing through the water to as little as possible, right? Obviously, and you can think about it, you don't want to have a prow of a ship being square and blunt. How would that be aerodynamically to try to move through the water? Well, water flowing is going to carve and shape things in its obstruction, in its pathway, to provide the least aerodynamic resistance to the water flow. And that's exactly what we see here.
Looking at the surf, at the ocean or whatever, and little pebbles or rocks just sitting up, causing that friction that you're talking about, and the water sucking everything else back. That's kind of what that reminds me of.
Yeah, and so here you can, as I'm scanning over, you can see how massive this drumlin field is. And the other cool thing about this is you can see that the drumlins themselves have a long axis, right? They're typically going to be 3 to 4 up to 10 times as long as they are wide. And I think that the creation of drumlins is a two-step process. The first thing is that the glaciers have to come in there and pulverize the bedrock. Then the water flows shape that pulverized chaotic bedrock into these fluviodynamic forms that you see here. Except that the fact is that they're flowing under the glaciers. There's not a free surface. So what that does is it amplifies the pressure of the water, and that's key to the shaping of the till into these streamlined forms, is that the water, because if you remove the lid that keeps it under pressure, then what it's going to do, it's going to not create these swarms of aerodynamic forms. What it's going to do is it's going to become channelized. And you're just going to see a succession of channels. If I move out here to where, like, we know that the ice sheet ended, let's zoom out a little bit, and you go down here to the south end of some of these of the Finger Lakes, you've got channels. See, here's a channel. This is a meltwater channel here. Over here, you've got another meltwater channel. So this is where the water is now discharged from under the ice sheet. Now, at its maximum, the ice sheet came down to the southern end of the Finger Lakes. But apparently when the melting happened, the ice had receded back, and the ice margin is defined by the northern ends of the lakes. Now, here's something else that's interesting. If you zoom in, notice again that there's, I'm going to zoom in here even more.
Is that all the same kind of bedrock or stone too? Or
mostly, yeah. It's a lot of shale up in that area.
So what would happen if that was, is that specifically because of the shale? Would that look the same if it was a different type of stone?
Oh, yeah, because you find the key is doesn't so much matter the lithology as much does the composition of the ground mass. In what the glaciers do, again, whatever the rock tends to be, it tends to grind it up and pulverize it. That's the key. You've got this pulverized ground mass below the glaciers. It could be tens to hundreds of feet thick. And so this is what that water is. Below the water is this chaotic stuff, the ground mass, the till. Above it is the lid of ice. So again, what that does is it forces the water to move under pressure. And it's that pressure that's a key, I think, to creating those aerodynamic shapes. But now what I'm getting at is if you look here, you'll see that the lakes are oriented and they're parallel to the orientation of the drumlins. If I go over here, check this out. Now I'm going to zoom out. And if I start drawing lines along the axes of these lakes, well, they're radial. You see that?
Yeah.
See over here, look at Lake Oneida. This is, let's see, what lake is that again? Onondaga Lake right there. And you come around and you see that they're radial. And you come over here, and if you draw lines along the axes of these lakes, they converge right here in the center of the east area of Lake Ontario. And there's a basin right there. The deepest section of Lake Ontario is right here. The Ontario Basin, it's the place where Lake Ontario is the deepest. And if you go from the center line there and draw radial lines out, basically it defines the orientation of the Finger Lakes. Well, the other thing that's interesting is as you move across here, let's see, we can see remnant drumlin over here. Now check this out. Do you see the orientation of these drumlins? You see how they're oriented to the northeast?
Yeah, they're on an angle over there.
The drumlins are pointing to the same area, which is this area. So the drumlins and the Finger Lakes, I would argue right there, that alone suggests that they're both the consequences of the same event. And I can go over, I showed you where there's other drumlins. I can come over here to, let's say, Wisconsin. Let's zoom in here and let's see if we see anything. Check this out. What do you see there, Mike?
Drumlins.
Drumlins, yes.
Brah.
Yes. Look at this. Huge, huge fields of these drumlins. Now, look at there. If we look at these drumlins and follow their orientation, it takes us right up to this trough that is Lake Winnebago and Green Bay. And that was a sort of a secondary meltwater trough coming off what was called the Michigan Lobe, which came all the way. You picture a big tongue of ice coming down here, occupying the basin of Lake Michigan. And then you have a meltwater channel coming along its eastern margin right here. It's still under the ice here. And then it spreads out, creates this enormous drumlin swarm. And then by the time you get to southern Wisconsin, it's actually discharging off of the ice sheet. It's free of this cap, this lid.
Why is I know Lake Superior is like one of the deepest freshwater lakes. I think was it Lake Baikal or something in Russia or something.
Is the deepest lake on Earth? Yes.
Yeah. But how did Superior get? Was it just because of the glacier that was there before? Was it already kind of set down like that, or what happened there?
Oh well, let's see. Tell you what we'll do here. Let's just go. I wonder if I can get over to Google Earth without. Is it changing to Google Earth, or am I going to have to stop sharing?
No, you're good.
Oh, cool. Good.
Here we go.
All right, so I'm going over to Google Earth. Look at this.
All right.
That, my friend, is extreme scouring. That is exactly what you see over in the Channel Scablands of eastern Washington that were created by gigantic meltwater flows.
Okay.
And it appears that this area here, what is this called again? This area that connects, that's
the UP,
there's a name,
the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah, I mean it's upper Michigan, but this is all sediment in here. So if we were to move that sediment, you would have had a meltwater flow that came down this way, right through the trough, which is now occupied by Lake Michigan.
Do the glaciers and all that have anything to do with the mineral deposits? Because I know the UP is super rich in copper, and it's actually a lot of pure coppers found in different parts of the world from that area. Does that have anything to do with that, or is that something that's always been the composition of that area?
I think, okay, so, Sudbury here is one of the largest copper mines on the planet, and lots of minerals coming out of metals and stuff coming out of Sudbury, which is an astrobleme. It's an ancient gigantic impact crater at Sudbury. It doesn't show up here, I don't think.
That's what I was going to get at. I was wondering how much.
Well, actually, it does show up a little bit. This is the impact crater right here.
Okay.
I'm circling it right here. And then, but it's very old. And what I think the glaciers tend to do is to exhume minerals that might have been otherwise inaccessible. But yeah, you can see here there was a flow came down right down this way and discharged where Duluth is. We can actually trace. Let me go back to Google Maps. Did this jump us back to Google Maps?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. I like this. Okay, so let me zoom in here. And you'll be able to see, now that you're getting the eyes to see, Mike, check this out. We can go back out here.
It sounds like some True Detective shit, some creepy shit.
There might be
So, you had huge meltwater pulses coming down this way, and if I come in here and zoom in on the St. Croix River, check this out. Now, what we're starting to see topographically, look at this. Look at these flow effects. You can see them very clearly, can't you?
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, look at this. You had huge meltwater streams. And of course, again, look at the modern St. Croix River. It's underfit in the same way. I mean, look at this. Here you can see one embankment over here. You can see a streamlined erosional residual.
Absolutely.
An SER right here. You can see how the water flows bifurcated and then flowed back together. The cool term for that is anastomosing. Say that a couple of times, Maurice. Anastomosing. That's where you have the branch. Anastomosing. Let me hear you say it.
Anastomosing.
Now say it 3 times in a row.
There it is. You learn something every day.
I'm impressed. So anastomosing is when you have this branched pattern where the streams will separate and then flow back together again. And we can see all of that as we come down here. I mean, look at these amazing landscapes, how the water bifurcate. Look at this, how it separated in and flowed back together. And probably initially, before the channels were cut, you had a huge like sheet flood moving over the whole land. And then what happens is typically you're going to have the water spread out, and it won't be that deep, but then it will be exploiting low areas within the terrain, weak areas in the terrain, and it'll begin to channelize. So it'll go from a sheet flood to a channelized flood. Once it starts creating those channels, the bigger they get and the deeper they get, the more effective they become at capturing the water flow. Once they capture that water flow, as long as the water keeps flowing, they're going to now it's going to speed up, it's going to accelerate the erosion, right? Until the spigots are turned off, the taps are turned off, and the taps are turned off basically when the ice is gone. But you can go down here and you can just look at these amazing forms. At the latter stages of the process, these would have been islands. And they would have been, rapid, turbid rivers just flowing, choked with icebergs. You got to picture the choking with the icebergs. When I get down here, look at this. Now here's the modern river. Look at this embankment over here. So the channel was this wide.
That's crazy.
And it is crazy. I'm going to come down here to St. Croix Falls. And right here at Interstate Park. Yeah, Interstate Park. there was a constriction, because right here there's some very dense basalt bedrock. And so what happened is this water flow, if you can picture, it's wide and then it gets constricted. Well, when you're talking about fluvial phenomena, flowing water phenomena, here's the interesting thing about it. There is a conservation law that affects the flow of water. So let's say you have a conduit that's a pipe whose diameter is consistent with no change. There's no change in the gradient. So the water flowing through there at any given point, if you measure the water flowing through that pipe, and then the pipe is 100 feet long and 50 feet down, you measure the flow of water again, it's going to be consistent. It's going to be a uniform flow, right? What's going to happen if in the pipe you put a little bend in there and maybe it's 10 degrees of a slope and then it changes to 5 degrees of slope? And then it changes to 3 degrees of slope and then it gets steeper again. Well, all of this is going to affect the velocity of flow. Now, also think about, what if you change the diameter of the pipe so that it's a 3-inch pipe and suddenly it goes to a 6-inch pipe? All of these things affect the flow. Now, if you think in nature, you obviously don't have a uniform pipe with consistent gradient and consistent diameter. It's constantly changing. So here's what happens. Let's say you have a constriction with really hard to erode bedrock. Like right here at St. Croix Falls, you've got a very dense basalt bedrock, right? So what happens now, if the water is spread out, if you do this, if you've got a stream, and let's say it's 20 feet wide, and then you go down, a couple hundred yards and you measure it and it's only 10 feet wide. Well, as long as, you don't have some change in the flow regime because you've got a big flood coming from upstream or a rainfall or something. But let's say, it's on an average day and you go and you take 2 measurements, at the same time. What you're going to discover is where the stream is 20 feet wide is going to have the same amount of water flowing past a given point as the stream that's only 10 feet wide, as long as it's the same stream. Well, what is this telling you? If it's the same volume of water, it means that the twice as much water has to be flowing past that point where it's only 10 feet wide instead of 20 feet wide. So what happens is, in nature, when the water is flowing, if it comes into a constriction, it has to speed up, you see. Then if that constriction opens up and it gets wide, so what's called a basin so now the water is spreading out and it's slowing down. Now, when you're talking about water flow, there's 2 processes that work in tandem: erosion and deposition. You don't have one without the other. If water is eroding and picking up and transporting material from one source, it has to get rid of it somewhere. Ultimately, that would always be the oceans, but oftentimes in the real world, it never makes it to the ocean. But let's say the water is moving through a constricted area. Because that constricted area is confined, the water is speeding up. Because the water is speeding up, and it has to become more erosive. It picks up more material, and then let's say it comes clear of the constriction, opens up into a basin. Well, the water slows down. So what happens when the water slows down is it loses its competency to transport sediment. So it begins to deposit that sediment, and of course, the first sediment that gets deposited is going to be the biggest and heaviest sediment. And so now, as you go, so like at the mouth of a constriction, you will have what's called a bar, simply a bar, right? It could be a delta. Like a delta is going to be a deposition of material that takes place underwater, and it creates a fan-like structure, right? The city of New Orleans is built on a delta that was built by meltwater coming down the Mississippi. Okay, so you've got this delta. Now, if you go and you do a transect from upstream to downstream end of this delta, what you'll discover is that there is a grading that's going on in terms of the sediment size. So on the upcurrent, the sediment is going to be larger. And as you move towards the terminus of the bar on the downstream end, the sediment gets successively finer and finer and finer, right? So if you look at a section of one of these deposits and you see this very distinct size sorting, well, that is a paleocurrent indicator, because it'll tell you which way the flood or the water was flowing. Now, in a modern creek or a river, we know because we can just simply observe the direction of flow. But when we're looking at paleohydrology and we're trying to reconstruct ancient events, ancient water flows, we don't necessarily know which way that we can surmise based upon topography and all of that, but there's a lot of variables there. So if you're trying to trace an ancient water flow, you use a variety of these paleocurrent indicators to tell you which way the water was moving. Now, if we go back here to St. Croix Falls, if I zoom in, there is right on this outcrop right here. Let's see, let's go down here. I'm going to jump over to Google Earth. We might actually be able to see the giant potholes. There are a series of these gigantic potholes. Look there, they named a town after me. That's the town of Randall. You know, I have never been to the town of Randall. I guess I should go there, stand in the middle of the town. Stand.
I was going to say, stand in front of the sign and have somebody take your picture. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you know what? I should do that. Let me see. Let me go back here. Where am I? I'm getting lost here. Where are we here? Okay, so let me go back over to, well, first of all, I'll just go to this. There we go. So I'm in still Google Maps, so I can't get 3D. But Interstate Park, if I zoom in, Taylor's Falls Canoe, let's see, where is it? There is a series of these gigantic potholes. You know what a pothole is? It's a hole that's drilled into the bedrock. There we go. Look at here. Glacial potholes, historical marker. Okay, so let's see. Can we see the potholes? They're not showing up that good. They're all. I
can see what you're talking about, though. I can see those little circular divots.
Yeah. So let's see. I bet you if I click here, we might actually. Did it bring up the pictures?
Yeah.
Looks like it did, didn't it? Yep. Good. Okay.
It looks like a little quarry or something like that.
Yeah, it is. Well, it was quarried by nature. And these are, 60, 70 foot high cliffs right here. This is basalt. This is actually looking across at the Wisconsin side. Let me see if we've got.
We actually found this really, really sick diving quarry in, where was that, Maurice? It was in the UP. I think it was Black River Campgrounds, maybe, somewhere around there. And it was crystal blue water, and it was super deep, though. It looked like it was shallow. It wasn't. And it was this white, beautiful rock. It was amazing. It was a great sight.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah, check out this picture. Now, this picture, you're standing down. I didn't take this one, but I have taken pictures from this exact vantage point. In fact, I've got one where I'm down in the bottom of the pothole, and Graham Hancock is peering over the rim.
That looks like the thing from Batman that he has to climb out of.
Well, it is. I mean,
where's Bane?
This is a vertical shaft here. And there are potholes in the surface of this bedrock shelf that are up to 20 feet wide and 80 feet deep if you were to clear out all of the sediment that's accumulated in them. Now, how do these form? Well, these form because when you have extremely turbulent water masses, just like when you have extremely turbulent air masses, it creates vortices that ultimately become tornadoes, right? This is what we got here is colking. This is underwater tornadoes. They're a function of deep, swiftly moving, highly turbulent water. And you get these underwater tornadoes that can literally drill right through the hardest bedrock in a very, very short period of time, right?
I mean, what would be like an example of that? Like, we go canoeing a lot. Would that be like when you see those little like whirlpool things, but like on a super large level or something like that?
Yes. You got that. Yes, that's exactly right, Mike. That's exactly right.
Wow.
So yeah, there's
it's a good fishing hole is what they call it.
A what? What do they call it?
Good fishing hole.
Oh, good fishing hole.
I'm just. Yeah.
I'm just looking to see if there's any more pictures. Okay,
like that one, baby.
Here's another one. and this one has some stagnant water in it, but you can see here, it's rounded, and there's a collection of these huge potholes along the shelf of this basalt. And if we go back to the map, let me go back to the terrain view, get that out of the way, zoom out. Essentially what you had right here, you see this where Taylor's Falls is, that's a constriction. And so all of this water that was occupying the wide channel up here all got almost like a Venturi flume, got forced through this bedrock constriction right here. And as it emerged from that constriction, you got a picture that this water had incredible, just like you said, imagine those swirling eddies you've seen in flowing water. It's what you had here times 10,000 times 100,000, right?
Wow.
So you've got a whole series of these colking underwater tornadoes, whirlpools forming right here where this water is gushing out. And you can see right here where it gushed out and it's begin to spread out. You see an embankment here. And then check this out. Right over here, this is incipient cataract formation. So this is like a legacy of the overland flows, because what's happening is the water is pouring over. Picture that the friction of that rock is just literally plucking boulders off of the cliff. And as the shear forces of this forceful water pouring over this edge, it's pulling the material off. It's plucking the boulders and the rocks off of the cliff face. As a consequence, the cliff face migrates upstream. And so what you get, it's called a recessional cataract. This is a cataract formation right here. If the overland flows had continued, this cliff right here would have continued to migrate upstream. But a lot of these features are just basically at whatever the status of erosion and deposition was at when the final gasp of these great meltwater floods ended. That was the landscape that got left. And 10 or 12,000 years of subsequent environmental and geomorphic effects has done very little to these gigantic landforms that were created at the end of the last ice age. So then that water flowed down here and ultimately flowed into the Mississippi right here. And you can see over here, the Mississippi looks like a little trickle here comes down. And you can see the Mississippi flows into the channel of the Minnesota River. And that's that same river that we looked at. You can see there's the modern river flowing in the big channel. That big channel comes up here, widens up. Look at how wide it is right here.
That's crazy.
Right? And I know, and that's all meltwater. We zoom back out. Here comes the St. Croix it meets.
I mean, we see that too, a lot of this stuff on a smaller scale, but when we go canoeing on the Manistee River and the Pine River in Michigan and all those rivers, you have those banks that are they're so high. We climb up them. They're just pure sand. And you can see where all that stuff was carved out.
Call them the dunes.
And how high they were.
Yeah, and see, that's those are all relics. Those are features that were created during all of these catastrophic changes that occurred. If we go down here, I'm going down here to Prairie du Chien, where Mississippi meets the Wisconsin River. And I can zoom in here, and you can see, look at the Wisconsin River. Same condition, isn't it? See how it's underfit?
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, look at this.
Look how intense, too, the topography is once you get right beyond those lines, too.
Yeah. So the pre-existing topography was essentially erased. Yeah, that's what crazy. You got to realize here. It is crazy, but it's real. It's right there, and it's undeniable once you understand the grammar here of this. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach people how to read this script that's engraved into the surface of the earth. And it's literally a script that tells this epic story of global change on a scale that's almost unimaginable. And this story has been there engraved into the surface of the earth, too big for humans to even perceive it until the last generation or two. And now this epic tale is revealing itself to human eyes, to the human mind for the first time in 12,000 years. And we can go back
thing,
up.
my friend.
Damn.
And what? It's exciting
it's
stuff.
A beautiful
isn't
thing,
it?
my friend. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it is. It's really game changing in so many ways. Right up here at the Wisconsin Dells, this was another catastrophic outlet right in here, and the water that came through here. Let's see. I bet you we can pull some pictures up right here of the Wisconsin Dells. No, that's back at the. Let me just click on. Didn't mean to get back over there. Let me pull back up. Go over here to the Wisconsin Dells, right here.
You know what? Can we pause real quick? I'm just going to read this ad. I'm just going to pause.
Absolutely.
We're gonna do it live, but I'm just going to pause what we're doing real quick while I read this thing here.
Sure, go ahead, man.
All right. All right. If you're looking for an excellent I just messed that up live, but I don't care. If you're looking for an excellent philosophy podcast, here's the show for you. The Partially Examined Life is a philosophical podcast by four guys who were at one point set on doing philosophy for a living. For each episode, they pick a text and chat about it with some balance between insight and flippancy. You don't have to know any philosophy or even read the text they're discussing or talking about to follow and enjoy. With a 13-year-plus catalog of episodes, The Partially Examined Life has probably covered any philosophical topic you're interested in. From practical ethics to theoretical foundations of science, they go deep in the history of philosophy while making it personal and funny. Join the over 45 million downloads already pondering The Partially Examined Life. Find new episodes wherever you stream your podcast or go to partiallyexaminedlife.com. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Right. And we're back.
That brought tears to my eyes, Mike.
Yeah, that early fumble really got me off to a terrible start. But that's the first ad we've ever done. Shout out to Partially Examined Life. We're doing a swap ad swap. So I actually have listened to some of their episodes. It's really, really good if you like philosophy. I'm a big philosophy nerd, so
yeah, it sounded interesting. I hadn't heard of it, but it sounds interesting. You'll have to give me a link before.
There you go. All right,
here. All right, you see.
Let's pull it back up.
Okay.
Let's get it back going. All right.
All right. So
Maurice is just on the screen. How do we get Maurice off? Get off there, Maurice.
I'm ready.
All right. This is what's called a pedestal rock, and this is created by. This is not some gradualistic process. This is created by catastrophic flows that carved out the so-called Wisconsin Dells. And basically what you had here is this is a function of how deep the water was flowing through here. You'll notice that there's this overhang over here on the right cliff, and then it's as if this pinnacle rock is wearing a hat. It's like a pedestal. Well, what happened was at one point the water flowing through here came up to the bottom of these overhangs. And so this can be used to determine high water marks. Now, early in the process, the water was probably up here, but remember I explained the channelization process? Once it got channelized through here, and these are mostly sandstones, it probably stabilized right here at this level. And so then obviously if it's not flowing up here, it's not eroding this cap rock as much as it's eroding the rock below it. Now, if the floodwaters had continued for any length of time, and I'm going to just off the top of my head guess anywhere from 3 or 4 days up to another week or two, this pedestal rock wouldn't have been there. It would have been gone. Again, it's a relic of the status of erosion at the time the water flows ceased, right? Let's see what else we can find here.
I want you to pull up something in a minute too, because there's something that reminds me. It's called Turnip Rock in Michigan. It's
okay.
What are those called? Austin. Yeah, Port Austin. It's Picture Rocks or something like that.
Okay.
But it's got that vibe that we're looking at right now. That's
okay. We'll do that.
Yeah.
Look at this. Now these are the sandstones, and these have been carved by these catastrophic meltwater floods. And I'm going to go back to the map here, and you can see up here, this was a huge meltwater pool that ponded up here, and it flowed down, carving this landscape that we see here. And check this out. You can see where the water flowed this way. And then over here, where is Devil's Lake? Here it is. Okay. So Devil's Lake State Park was one of the outlet flows.
Ooh.
You can very clearly look at that
it's Halloween
channel.
Time.
Devil's Lake, yeah. And you can see where the water flow came this way. It did a sharp bend to the east, and then it came down this way, and it met the flow that was coming over this. Now,
speaking of Devil's Lake, come join Randall Sunday night as he talks about the Day of the Dead. You can find it on his website, so the link is down below.
Listen, guys, this is some really interesting stuff when we start talking about the ancient festival of the dead. And it's the precursor to our Halloween. And it ties in actually with all of the stuff we've been talking about tonight. And I'm going to show those connections in the Sunday night live stream. And it's going to go at least 2 hours, two and a half hours. And then we'll have like 30 minutes for question and answer. And then the whole thing will be recorded. So, it's charging $18, which I think is very reasonable because that's like the cost of a movie ticket.
$18 for knowledge? Come on. I mean, you can go.
Yeah.
You can pay more getting a meal at a fast food place when you can have all that knowledge.
That's right.
Without the shit in your belly.
And the thing is, you buy the ticket, you've got access to it for forever. You can download it and it'll be available. And if you've get together with some friends, I mean, you get together with 3 or 4 friends and everybody puts in like $3 or $4, come on, and the reason I'm doing that, I've been told, hey, it's worth a lot more than that. But my goal here is to get this information out to as broad an audience as possible. So if you're in high school and you're, working at a $750 an hour job or something like that, and you're interested in this kind of stuff, I want this to be available to you. I don't want to charge $40 or $50 for it. And get together with some buddies or friends and, pitch in a few bucks each, or I'm going to try to keep it pretty much family friendly. So I already got some friends that they're planning to watch it as a family because their kids love Halloween.
No, it's a perfect thing, man. I mean, you've got that following too. It reminds me of what we do for like Fish and Dead shows. They have Couch Tour where you can watch the show in HD from your house if you don't want to go to the show. Same kind of vibe. Totally worth it too.
Yeah. Okay. I think so. I mean, yeah. What can I say? So. And the money that we raise from this is actually going into trying to get access to more information. I mean, basically, I have a day job, which I'm sort of segueing out of actually, but it pays my bills. And, behind me, I've got a studio that I've built that's allowing me to upgrade everything. The dissemination of information that we're attempting to do has been upgraded massively by the creation of this studio. And I've got a game plan I'm laying out. And so anybody who's interested, one of the things that we may have talked about this, I've been looking at the history of education in the world. And I'm very much interested in establishing an academy, a school, whatever you want to call it. The 2 things I've done in my life to earn my keep is I've been a builder and a teacher.
A modern day Milesian school?
Something like that, yes. Influence from the Platonic Academy, the schools of Pythagoras, some of the meetings in the groves.
Oh, we know what's going on, bro. We know what kind of Pythagorean stuff you've got in mind. You don't have, I know where this is going. God.
Going where? I was thinking more about Pythagorean geometry.
I'm joking.
Yeah, this guy.
We know about your ascetic cult. Don't worry about it, bro.
He's really going off his rocker.
Yeah. Well, I've thought about that. I've thought about maybe starting my own cult, but I don't know. That would be kind of boring.
I would join, bro. So don't worry about it.
Would you really?
I would.
No. I don't know. Trust you. Somebody, people have said that, you're just a member of Randall Carlson's cult. And I go, well, this is a cult like others because
I've never heard a cult leader say, I don't know this or I don't know that. So I think you're already off.
Yeah, and you've never heard a cult leader says, think for yourself. Hey, I might be full of shit, but I'm probably not. But, everything I say.
I'm interested, bro. I like what you're doing with the education thing. You mentioned this last time. We talked about it for a little bit, what you're trying to do. And I think it's great. I think that, when it comes to stuff like this, you're not going to learn this in school unless you're going to get your geology degree or something like that. So,
oh, hell no, yeah.
I think to have have a tenuous grasp on how the earth that we live on was formed and reformed and terraformed and whatever, I think that it's important to know. I don't know.
And how it affected the rise and fall of civilizations. And that opens the door to something that, is the other thing that I think we're all keenly interested in is, realizing that the evidence is pointing really strongly to there being a much more complicated history of human civilization on this planet than mainstream academia has recognized up to this point. And I think for years, they've been kind of sweeping this anomalous evidence, these outliers, under the rug, but there's so much stuff now under the rug that there's no more room. So everything's spilling out, and they're not going to be able to avoid going, yeah, you know what? There really is perhaps an alternate history here. And it's not just some weird fringe New Ager or nutcases that are looking at and opening this up as a possibility. Because it really, again, what we talked about earlier, how long modern humans have been on this planet, and we can assume that for 150,000 years.
300. I mean, there's even some evidence that could go back to like almost 4. So there's some cave findings recently. I think Kazem Cave in Israel and a couple other places.
Yeah, and I've done enough traveling and research, and I'm sure you guys have too, to suggest that there is evidence that they were. I'm a builder, so I've had experience, moving heavy weights and moving beams and moving stones and when I go, wait a second, time out here. You're telling me that you've got a society, a group of people, a tribe of people that are generally hunter-gatherers, nomadic, or they're subsistence farmers, but somehow they find the means to organize immense pools of labor, astronomical knowledge, engineering knowledge, and feed armies of workers to build these temples and these pyramids and these monuments, and regularly all over the world moving 50-ton and 100-ton stones and up. And come on, this is not adding up. Don't tell me that, this is just in their spare time some nomadic hunter-gatherers are building pyramids or building temples and carving, moving 100-ton stones. It just
that's the argument, right?
Sense.
Like I know the slave thing's been out of the equation for a while, and actually I think it was the Greeks that kind of perpetuated that. But the mainstream theory now is that they were farmers, and during the rainy season or the wet season along the Nile, when it would flood, they would go and contribute. So they were like people that were either masons or handy or whatever, and that they would go there. But then you have Graham Hancock, who's pointed out the amount of people needed to complete these tasks there wasn't even that many people living in that area at that time. So,
right.
Yeah, it's kind of a conundrum.
And you see the same phenomenon all over the place.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make sense. And I don't care. To challenge it and say it doesn't make sense doesn't make you some pseudoscientific fringe New Age crackpot. I'm sorry.
Well, here's the good thing: we're not scientists, so we can question things and talk about whatever. Like that's the thing is I do think that on some level, some of these academics and scientists, I think they're jealous. I think they're jealous that they can't step outside of what they're doing on this this micro progression of discovery or whatever, and it's always going towards something material or something that has to do with what's going on in the world and society right now, as opposed to the stuff we talk about, which is the more important stuff. Where do we come from? Where did this all begin? Why did it happen? You don't ever hear. I know that there's different, there's anthropology and different fields that would look at this, but I don't ever hear the archaeologists really talk about like the pantheon of gods and like why they were important and how they played into the ideas of metaphysics and why people were building these structures and correlating them to the stars and correlating them to, the anatomy and whatever. So,
yeah, I'm sorry, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. Nobody pays me to do science, but I've been studying science for decades. And that doesn't mean that my integration of knowledge and thinking about these things is any less viable or credible than somebody who happens to get paid. In fact, one of the things that my critiques of science is that it easily slips into over-specialization. And particularly in the geological realm. You will have a geologist, let's say, does his or her PhD on one outcrop and spends 5 years on that one outcrop. Well, you want to learn about that outcrop, yeah, you could definitely read their thesis or their dissertation, and you can find out the culmination of 5 years of work on that outcrop. Does that necessarily qualify them to have a coherent grasp of the big picture? Not necessarily. See, and it's like that. You got 100 archaeologists working on Clovis sites around North America. Well, what needs to happen is how do we integrate those Clovis sites into a coherent pattern of population over, during Paleolithic occupation of North America? Well, that's the kind of thing that has to follow. And oftentimes that falls in the hands of more the non-specialist. And right now, what science is really, really good at is basically accumulating data with the technologies we have now, both that can see things on the macro scale and the micro scale that's beyond the limits of, what the human scale. Well, we're getting reams and reams of data about things, far more than the analysis and integration of that data into coherent understanding, you see. So
well, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's why we need philosophy, because science is really good at explaining how things work or how they got there. They're not good at explaining why, or do they even try to explain why? So that's why it's important what you're doing, because you do inject philosophy into it, which is kind of, you don't see that among academics. And actually, to what you're saying with the over-specialization, I actually really agree with that too. I remember I was going back and forth with the geologist on Reddit, and I brought up this cave in Chiquahite, Mexico, that had supposedly 200-300 stone tools that were found that date back to 30,000 years ago. Which would push the timeline. Obviously it's double the distance of Clovis. So he'd never even heard of it. So, I mean, what does that, what does that say? Like, if you're in that field studying, and that was his specialization, he didn't even know about it too. So I don't know.
Crazy.
Well, yeah, see, what there is now is the cult of the expert. And there are people who are experts, bona fide experts, and you want to learn as much as you can from the experts. But there's also this, particularly with the whole thing, where, because I come at, like, I'm very critical of the whole climate change consensus, right? And what you often hear from mainstream media is, well, the experts have said this or the experts have said that. And then my first thing in my mind is, well, who are these experts? Somebody will come on.
They're just other people with cognitive biases.
A lot of them, yes. And people will come on some of the comment and chat boards and stuff talking about, something I was said. And, well, why would I believe Randall? I'm going to believe the experts, right? Okay, well, what experts would that be? Are you talking about?
The expert that Randall dismantled on Joe Rogan. He's like, yeah, actually, I agree with you. Like half the stuff he was agreeing with you on.
Well, yeah. Well, see, and listen, I think there's a place for skeptics. You got to have it, because there's a lot of bullshit out there and you need skepticism. My problem is when the skepticism becomes sort of politicized And, listen, I met Michael Shermer, I hung out with him afterwards, and I liked the guy, I didn't meet Mark DeFant personally. I'm sure I'd get along just fine with him. And if I had questions about volcanology, he'd be a guy I'd talk to, That doesn't make him an expert in paleohydrology, though. So his problem was he came on, I suppose, thinking just because there are a lot of these fringe characters out there that, when you really try to get down to what they're saying, it just doesn't add up.
No, I love the fringe, but you're right. There is,
yeah,
there's a decent amount of people that how did you write that book? Because
yes,
like what you're saying now, I hate to say, because I love the fringe categories and topics, but there is so much stuff, whether it be the alternative archaeology stuff or UFOs, UAP, where you brought up Bigfoot. There's legitimate people that are studying these things that do have a level head on their shoulders that are actually doing the research, and then you have the people where it's like, yeah, I think I'm good on that information. So
yeah, and I felt people were too hard on Professor DeFant, because I think he came on there assuming he was going to get somebody. And listen, I have the same thing. When people start spouting opinions at me, and it's apparent that they haven't put in the time, they haven't done their homework, they haven't done their research. It's like I start getting a little bit annoyed, and I want to kind of put them in their place and say, look, you read a book 2 years ago, and you've read 3 or 4 books since then, and now you think you've got it figured out, and you've got opinions. And look, I'm still got more questions than I do answers, and I've been studying this shit for almost a half a century, right? So I keep thinking, oftentimes I'm reminded back of the end of the first Indiana Jones movie. Remember when the government got a hold of the Ark, and Indiana Jones was like, "What have you done with this thing?" "Well, we're going to study it." "Well, who's going to study now?" Because he knows there's nobody on Earth that knows more about this subject than him.
They lock it in a box and throw it in the warehouse.
And he says, "Well, who's going to study it?" And the government agent says, "Oh, top men. We've got top men on it." And Indiana Jones says, "Well, what top men?" Because he knows all the top men, right? So he knows he's just bullshit, And then that's followed by top men. They're taking the crate and putting it in this massive warehouse where it's going to get lost. But I often think of that, why should I listen to what Randall Carlson has to say about these floods? I'm going to listen to the experts. And I'm going, well, what experts? I've probably met every expert, and I have. I mean, there's a few of I've been out in the field with over a dozen of these guys, I've read all their papers. I've read PhD theses that you can only, back in the day, when you couldn't even get them online, you had to travel across the country and go to the college, the university they graduated from, and get a copy of their PhD.
That's another problem, right? Is access to these papers. I know a lot of these sites you have to pay to even get it. There's a few. There's PubMed. There's a few out there that you can access without paying. But yeah, I mean.
Yeah, and Google Scholar is getting better and better. They're posting a lot of stuff that you couldn't get before, So that's a good tool. I recommend to people. The other one is I subscribe to it. Starts with an R. What am I thinking? It'll come to me in a second. But you know what I do is I go ahead and I fork over some money to the universities for library privileges. Typically, it's $100 a year, and I get privileges. If I pay the $100 a year, like I do at, say, Emory University, and they have a gigantic database with links all over the world. So Have
you ever tried to get into the Vatican archives to see any sort
I haven't.
Cataclysm stuff?
No, I haven't, but boy, would that be
interesting.
Oh, yes, wouldn't
I know it's been a hot place lately. I know that's where Diana Pasulka got some information for her book American Cosmic on UFOs and stuff, and that's where Brian Murescu got some information for his book, The Immortality Key.
Oh, did he?
So yeah, I mean, you can definitely find. It's obviously. I mean, you have to think that they have probably a lot of the records from certain times that you couldn't find anywhere else, I would imagine.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with who was that you said that got. Now Brian, I know him.
Diana Pasulka. Diana Pasulka
Okay.
is, I think she's a professor of theology or something like that at University of North Carolina. But she wrote a book called American Cosmic on like UFOs, UAP.
Oh, okay.
That kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that name. But yeah, that's how I access. You know, I bite the bullet and I pay for the privileges of being able to use, you know, library databases. And then there's also Sci-Hub, which is sort of a black market site out of Russia, where there's a group of people who.
That's how crazy that is. There's a black market site for scientific papers. Like what?
Well, because of exactly what you said.
I know. I'm saying that's how crazy that is.
Yeah, there are critical papers that are you got to pay $20 or $30 to get past the paywall.
That's crazy.
Unless you're affiliated with an institution. And so that's what I do is I bite the bullet, and I don't take a course, but I pay money to get library privileges. But the whole point of Sci-Hub is they're trying to democratize science.
Yeah.
And so I do, God, why can't I think of the one that I use all the time? It's an excellent source. And
because it's the one you use all the time. You don't even think about it. That's why.
I know. It'll come to me in a second. But yeah, so between all of those sources, I can usually get 90% of the papers I'm looking for. You know, I could do a share screen right now. I'll show you, and I can pull up, for example.
We do have a couple questions, though.
Okay.
It's a follow-up one from Given Zero Fox.
Okay,
I'll let you figure that one out. He wanted to ask, because he's from Michigan, too. We were kind of chatting a little bit in the live stream chat. And he had a couple of his questions already answered, but he wanted to know about the isostatic rebound being the reason for all the spring-fed rivers and a spot like Grayling that is near confluence headwater of two rivers, which is the Manistee going west and the Asable going east.
Ah, okay. The answer is I don't know, but it sounds very plausible. And there are isostatic effects in Michigan, no doubt. And it very well could be. Certainly, the aquifers up there in any of the regions beneath the ice sheet or contiguous to the ice sheet, those aquifers were completely recharged. The Oglala Aquifer in the Midwest, the one that's being drawn down so rapidly by agriculture, that was completely recharged during the meltdown of the glaciers. And so I fully suspect that, yeah, the groundwater, a lot of that meltwater is still being stored in the groundwater and is emerging as springs. Absolutely. I think whoever.
Screen name says Sci-Hub is the Napster of research.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Hey, you guys have a pretty literate listeners, don't you?
Oh, yeah. No, we love our escapees. Shout out to everybody and all of our friends from UFO Twitter. We should get you on a Twitter space one day if you want. We've been hosting these Twitter spaces. Sometimes you get 100 people in there listening, all at once. Just being able to, because you can. I think if you have 3 hosts, you can have 30 speakers, and then the rest of the people just listen. It's kind of like a podcast, but it's live. It's on Twitter.
Oh, so that sounds fun.
Well,
maybe over the holidays.
We're trying to.
Yeah.
What? Go ahead, Maurice.
Oh, I was just gonna say if our listeners out there could help us pump it up, we're trying to get to 30 likes. We're 2 away.
Ah,
dude, that's so
what
dinky.
Happens at 30 likes?
I don't even want to say that. To get 30 likes, what kind of dinky ass? No, that's how. Let me just tell you something.
You gotta do what you gotta do, brother.
That's how amazingly nice and cool Randall is he'll spend the time to come on a podcast where this episode might get 5, 6, 7,000 views, but that's because of him. Our normal videos don't get anywhere near that, but he takes the time because he's a nice guy. I mean, I can assure you. He's one of the nicest people and coolest people that we've interviewed. And I don't want to say the coolest because we have had some really cool people, but I would say there's about 10 people I can point out that are like, these people are fucking badass, and they deserve all the credit in the world. And you definitely,
there we go, baby.
One of them. So,
well, thank you, Mike. I like you. Of course, I like praise.
No, but it's genuine. I'm not fluffing. I'm not fluffing here. This is real. This is from the heart. All right. Well, so yeah, that was the question that we had. I'm trying to see if there was another one real quick here.
Well, I'm hoping that 100 of these people will come over and listen to our Festival of the Dead because
they will. Because
it's going to be cool. It's awesome stuff. And here's the cool thing about it. We all know Halloween. It's coming up. We're celebrated. Kids love it. And what people don't realize is how deep and profound the roots of it actually are. And in fact, once you've watched it, you'll understand the connections between our modern observance of Halloween and what we've just been talking about for the last couple hours.
Yeah. So no, I'm telling you, we're gonna get some people in there. I'll definitely tweet it out. I'll retweet it, and I'll get everybody involved.
Sweet.
Just we got another question. My co-host on the Roswell UFO Symposium says, "Will you please ask Randall if he will come on our podcast?" Now, I'll warn you, if you do come on, it's going to be about UFOs, bro. I just want to throw that out there.
Well, I have avoided the whole UFO question. I believe it's an integral part of the whole puzzle. And I have certain things that I've come to believe about it, and I'll put it in this context. If I look into ancient stories, legends, folklore, mythology, for example, all over the world, we have stories about gigantic floods, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we can easily make the case now that those stories are based in real events. We know that there have been gigantic floods, and they've left their traces all over the planet. Gigantic floods, way beyond anything we've seen within historical times, okay? But in prehistorical times, yes, it is, and it's very legitimate to talk about the post-diluvial world and the antediluvian world. That's a very legitimate thing. And I like to use that term, antediluvial, because it kind of reconnects us with some of our own classical concepts and terminology. But yeah, so the thing is that when you look at this aspect of it and you go, okay, well, here's all of these stories about floods, and there's a historical reality behind them. Now, what are the other universally ubiquitous stories that have come down to us, oftentimes intertwined with the flood stories, is the stories about the gods. Now, that has become a big subject of inquiry to UFO investigators, and rightfully so. I believe that in order for us to understand the modern phenomena, just like we can look at the modern phenomena of the paleohydrologic evidence engraved into the planetary landscape, and just as that can be informed by reference to ancient traditions and stories and myths and so on. Likewise, I believe that we can actually extract hard scientific information from the stories, the myths that have come down to us. This has been my approach to trying to understand the UFO phenomena. And I have deliberately refrained from talking about it because after considering it for many years, I've concluded that what people are thinking is UFOs is not what people think it is. And I have to leave it at that for now. But because of the fact that, NASA has now just authorized the second only UFO study, and they're declaring that they're going to be fully transparent, fully democratic, that all of their data is going to be publicly available. I'm going to take them at their word for that. So I'm going to be following that over the next 9 months because the investigation is slated to take about 9 months, they're saying. So NASA's convened a team of 16 scholars and scientists and academics who are going to now study the UFO phenomena for the next 9 months. They launched it on October 24th, so it just happened, right? So I'm going to see what they come up with. But
there's a report coming out on Halloween too, by the way.
By that group, or
I think it's the congressional.
Okay.
Or I don't know. I'm not big into the. I'm sure one of the UFO people in the chat will bring it up, but yeah, there's supposed to be a report due out on Halloween.
Okay.
Supposedly it's supposed to have some interesting stuff, but it's not going to be something like game-changing thing. But yeah, you're right about the NASA stuff. I'm keeping an eye on that as well, because initially they're like, we're only going to throw like $50,000 at it or whatever, and now it seems to be getting bigger. You also have Avi Loeb and the Galileo Project. You know, you have a lot of interest in this topic right now. So
yeah, and that's why I feel that maybe it's time for me to go ahead and start putting some of this stuff, some of my own conclusions about it. But there are reasons that once I put it out there, there'll be reasons why I've kept it on the down low as long as I have. There's reasons for that. And
I can get down with that. I mean, I don't have a conventional like, oh, there's physical aliens coming here. You know, I have I love the book Carl Jung wrote on it, and it left it ambiguous, kind of like what you're doing right now. But I think 1,000% it's connected to consciousness in our minds, whether it be some sort of symbol of something that we can't fathom based on our perceptions or something along those lines. I definitely think there's more going on than we can perceive. So it's not as simple as aliens coming from a different planet or whatever. It could be interdimensional. It could be something that's been here for a while. It could be a lot of different things. So
could be a lot of different things. And actually, I think it is at least several different things.
That's definitely a hot topic.
Good point.
But one of those things I think I'm surprised at this point that no one else has come to this conclusion. And that's where I'm going to be getting into. That's, 2023. The fact that, that there's this heightened interest in the subject, even on official levels. I feel like, well, I'm going to put my own thoughts out there and into the mix and just see what happens.
You should. And I think you should come on our podcast and do it. Now that's
not
the
my
pitch.
Own.
That's the pitch. No, bro.
You can go to yours after.
No, yeah, do yours first. Do what you got to do. But yeah, no, look, you shouldn't be afraid to talk about something that interests you. Like
I'm not afraid.
I'm not saying you're afraid. I'm not saying that. Right. That's not what I meant. I meant you shouldn't feel like your reputation could be tarnished or nicked or anything like that based on talking about any of these other things, because this is, again, these are the biggest questions that face us. Like, are we alone? Is there more to life? Why are we here? Is there purpose?
Sure.
Did we create purpose? All these different things. And I think that nobody talks about this stuff, so it becomes so taboo, and it pisses me off, because it's like, if you bring this shit up, you're the weirdo. But it's like, how could you not think about this? I don't want to sit in front of my TV and drone out and do the same thing every day and then die. Right. That sounds fucking stupid. So
I'll put it this way. And whether my concerns are overblown or not remains to be seen. But I think of people like Leo Szilard in the late 30s or Andre Hellbronner, who through their studies had come to realize the potential of atomic fission. And you're sitting there just like Einstein understood the potential in atomic fission and thought, well, if this is real, if, the chain reaction that can be produced here is real, there are some really profound, game-changing, cultural-changing consequences to this information. And he rightfully was reluctant to share that information until World War II broke out, and he started thinking that the Nazis had accessed this information and they were going to be exploiting it. And in fact, when they first shared it with the Roosevelt administration, attention to it for about 9 months or a year into the war. And then finally, when they did pay attention to it, they go, oh my God, there's information like that that's out there. And if you were one of those physicists in the late 30s who really understood the potential, the destructive potential. Now, I'm not saying that this is destructive, but I just believe to be a little bit cautious, a little bit wary, because it's the kind of information that could completely alter the paradigm completely.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. Robert Oppenheimer, paradigm shifters. This is one of those things, because if there is a technology or something that can be accessed, whether it be consciousness based or material or whatever, you're going to need something similar to Atomic Energy Commission or something like that to oversee this technology, because look at the crazy people in the world right now doing crazy things. So I'm 100% there with you, right? On that. And you were right about Einstein too. That was in that American Prometheus book, that his only contribution to the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb was writing that letter to Roosevelt saying, I was approached about this. I'm a pacifist, but that's also why they didn't give him security clearance in the U.S., because he was a pacifist. So very interesting.
Yeah. So I'll just say this. The technology is out there. There have been numerous independent researchers, from Nikola Tesla to Wilhelm Reich to Victor Schauberger to Walter Russell, Oppenheimer himself, as we talked about earlier. And there's quite a list of others that made inroads into these alternate technologies. And one of the things that has happened, of course, is that in many cases, Schauberger, Reich, Tesla, that knowledge was suppressed. Why? I'm not going to say, because I don't know what the motive was, but the people who were suppressing it. But it was, all of them had their research. Reich had his laboratory destroyed by the FDA, reams and reams, 2 truckloads of notes and things that he was working on hauled away and burned in an incinerator. What was in all that stuff? Well, there is a technology, and it's out there, and it's waiting in the wings, and the time is getting very, very close when it's going to reveal itself. And it ties in with everything else. It ties in with the deep history of our civilization on this planet. It ties in with the whole UFO phenomena. It ties in with the cycles of catastrophe. And we're standing on the threshold right now of some major, major disclosures. And so I'm going to do my part to whatever I can to facilitate and accelerate this democratization of knowledge and putting it out there. But as we speak, pieces are being put into place for a major disclosure, and we will get into that in the near future. I know last time I've been sort of broaching this, people are getting frustrated. Say, well, why doesn't he just come in and tell us?
There's people doing that right now in the comments.
I'm sure, yes. I can't. And I wouldn't even if I could. I wouldn't. You know why? Because there's a point at which people have to find out things for themselves. And what I'm going to do, and what I have been doing, is I've been putting the bits and pieces out there for several years now. Somebody who is following it and really paying attention, there's enough pieces already out there to put those together. But, I'm not the kind of teacher that spoon feeds people. If you want this knowledge, it's there. The pieces are there. You're going to have to put out a little effort.
You're a real Socrates types. Type. This is not. This is Meno. This is Meno right here. This is the dialogue Meno.
That's right. That's exactly right, Mike. And if you want this knowledge, you have to earn it. You have to earn it. It's not something that's just going to be given to you, bestowed upon you. I'm trying to accelerate and abbreviate the process, which has taken me 50 years. But that doesn't mean that we can sit here in one podcast and you open your mouth and I spoon in some baby food and now you're going to get it. It don't work that way. It just doesn't work that way.
No, so I'm down. I like it. And you know what? You don't have to say anymore. we'll talk about it off air. You'll tell me all the secrets. I won't tell anybody, and we'll go from there. But no, real quick though, just so you know, again, we'll have you back on in the future, and you are welcome on our new UFO podcast if you would so like to choose to come on there and talk about that subject, even if it's just pure speculation. Daniel Haynes says, I have so many questions, I don't even know what to ask first. This is my first opportunity to directly ask him something after I've been listening to him for multiple years. Let's see what one of his questions is. Okay, it says, if I believe I've discovered a fossil that wouldn't really get a lot of attention by other people on the top of a cliff at a quarry in Chattanooga, Tennessee, is there somebody Randall recommends to show the fossil to?
Ooh, good question. I don't know, but that's an area I'm very interested in. I'm very interested in that whole.
Okay, he goes on too. I'm scrolling down. He says, it looks like a shell of some kind of a seashell and is embedded into a rock at the top of the quarry that had limestone that was dug out for construction on the Chickamauga Dam. I think that's how you pronounce it.
I think it's Chickamauga.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. Chickamauga. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of limestone in there. Let's see. I'm trying to remember. I mean, I've done the geological. What is it? I think it's close to Permian, 240 to 250 million years ago. I think that's when most of those limestones were laid down. Now, I'm not an expert on, being able to identify the fossils. It's something I definitely want to know more about. But back to the thing, that's why I said I need to be three people, at least three people, that we can share one intellectual capacity in three different people, right? So the alternate me can go do some research, and then we can like immediately transfer that knowledge over to my main brain.
If AI gets good enough, we can have a couple of Randall bots, and you can just do a show where it's just you and the two Randalls.
There we go. Me and the two Randalls. Yeah. Okay. So I think we're looking at 240 million year old limestones there. So I go back and I would go, what was swimming in the ocean 240 million years ago? And that would be where I'd start in trying to find an answer to that. But I couldn't recommend anybody. I would imagine there's probably a university in Chattanooga with a geology department. That's where I would start. Let's see, what universities
I saw, didn't you do a trip to Tennessee? I thought I saw earlier.
I've done a couple of trips up there. Yeah. Studying the patterns of erosion and deposition, because there's some really, really interesting stuff up there that people don't know about. Caves and gorges and slot canyons and cataracts and rock arches and natural bridges, and a lot of it is hidden under the canopy of vegetation. So the next trip we're going to be doing is going to be the third of a trifecta, which is we did the Lower Cumberland, the Middle Cumberland, and the Upper Cumberland. That's coming up in late March, and we've reserved a resort, Cliffview Resort. Pull that up and take a look at it. In late March, we're going to take over the whole Cliffview Resort, and we're going to use that as a base to explore. We're going to do Middlesboro, Kentucky, which is an ancient impact crater, also known as an astrobleme, with a town in the middle of it. We're going to explore that. We're going to be exploring some of the densest concentration of natural rock arches and bridges in the country. We're going to be exploring cataracts, canyons, waterfalls, and we're going to be doing it out of this amazing place called Cliffview.
Awesome. That sounds awesome.
I could do it.
I wasn't looking. Share. I thought Maurice was doing it, but then I realized young Maurice he's not.
Wow, he said it once.
Okay.
Daniel followed up and says it's at Greenway Farms Quarry in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in case you ever wanted to check it out one day.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, I'm going to be up there. I'm going up there more and more because, I I'm looking at land in eastern Tennessee. You know, there's a group of us coming together that's raising some money, and hopefully we'll find the ideal piece of property, and we're going to develop it according to the 21st century version of the ancient archaic principles. And it's going to be both a center for teaching and a base for doing tours, a place for conferences.
Just let me know where it is so I can show up a few years later and conquer it, and then.
Okay.
I'm joking.
Oh, okay.
But
no, serious.
No, but seriously, so is this going to be tied to the school thing too? Or
yes.
Is it, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Absolutely. That's what it is. That's exactly what it is.
Are you guys going to build a megalithic structure or what?
Oh yeah, of course.
Have you ever heard
we may not be, moving 50-ton stones, but we'll definitely do a hinge. There would most.
You should tell people you are though. Have you ever heard of the Gold Pyramid in Illinois?
I don't think so.
Dude, go watch this. Everybody should go. This is crazy, but there's this short documentary on YouTube. I think it's like 15, 20 minutes long or so. The Concrete King of Chicago built, I think it's Wadsworth, Illinois. I live not far, probably like a half hour, 45 minutes away from this thing, and I've driven there before. He built this huge pyramid house. It's a pyramid, and he gold-plated the outside, and he has like a 150-foot statue of Egyptian gods sitting out in front.
Really?
But they made a documentary about it. Anyways, this guy, I think he died or his wife died or something, and this place is kind of like abandoned now, but you can see this thing from pretty far. It's actually really super interesting. But yeah, check out the Gold Pyramid. It's like I said, it's on YouTube. I'll try and add the link down below after we're done. But you would like that. You would like that, Randall. Check that out.
Yeah, there's some very interesting stuff going on in Illinois. And yeah, Illinois has some of the most what you call anomalous events in the country. There's a concentration of, particularly in the southern area of Illinois, which I suspect is probably related to the presence of the fault line there, because fault lines can create some pretty strange effects in the geomagnetic field. But remember the great earthquake that was there? The New Madrid fault zone there.
Yeah.
And the great earthquake. You probably heard of that.
I've been living outside of Chicago for, let's see, 15 years, 16 years, and I think there's only been one earthquake, and it was like a 4.0 or something.
Uh-huh.
So we're not getting any sort of action like you would get on the coast.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, but yeah, there's interesting stuff going on there. I'm trying to find a picture of the lodge. I keep pulling up, and it keeps bringing up the same video.
I keep meaning to try and get down to, Maurice and I keep talking about it, going to check out the Cahokia and the mounds down there in southern Illinois.
Oh yeah, that's worth a trip. In fact, we are planning a mound trip sometime probably late summer 2023. We're going to focus.
Awesome.
Pardon?
So that sounds awesome.
Yeah, we'd probably focus a lot on the Hopewellian structures in Ohio. There's so much stuff up there. Be a little bit of a drive to go from there over to the Mississippian stuff. But yeah, Cahokia is definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, we've had Dr. Gregory Little on like 6 or 7 times. Aside from you, he's one of our top 10 favorite guests that I was mentioning earlier, but he wrote that whole book, or has that illustrated book on all the North American mounds. I'm super fascinated by it, and he's always posting like the effigies and the pipes and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
I'm definitely interested in getting to like Serpent Mound and then Cahokia and all those sites.
Yeah, Serpent Mound. Yeah, Serpent Mound would be on the Monumental Earthworks tour. Let's see if I can share screen. Yeah. Okay. So this is the place. We're taking this over late March and using this as a basis for our explorations. You seeing this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's Cliffview Lodge right there. So we're going to just pretty much take over that place for that week. So we're hoping to get 30 people to do this adventure with us. Late March. We want to get in there before the trees leaf out, so we can really see what's hiding in those landscapes. And so that's the Cliffview Lodge. Let's see if they have any other pictures here. Let's see if there we go. Look at this place. So it's gonna be great. We'll probably have meals out on the decks. We'll be able to have, after we've been out exploring during the day, we will gather on the decks, have lectures,
Gorgeous.
maybe have some jamming. I know we'll have some musicians there. I'm a percussionist. We try to fit in some good jamming. Mike, we're not hearing you.
Yeah, what's going on there, brother?
Can you hear me now?
I'm hearing.
There
you
is.
are.
Oh,
yeah, there you are.
I was gonna say, yeah, no, that sounds awesome. I'm definitely down. And Maurice and I are both musicians as well.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to bring the drone out there, fly it around.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been playing in jam band since we were 17. Maurice is actually, if anybody's interested, I have the link down below to Maurice's new CD. Check it out.
What kind of music you guys do?
Jam band stuff.
Jam band stuff, okay.
Yeah, like my stuff's more singer-songwriter, electronic.
His is more sappy, Radiohead, Wilco. Maurice has really transformed over the years into a singer-songwriter type, but our roots are like Grateful Dead, Fish, jam band stuff.
Yeah. Well, my roots were, in the original, I saw the Dead 5 times between 1968 and 1973. 68, their first national tour.
That's some of their best shit.
That was their best shit. I think that was still their peak, when they were really exploring the outer fringes.
Europe 72 is probably my favorite. That Jack Straw, Cumberland Blues.
Okay.
All that stuff.
Yeah. So, all of those bands back then, I was pretty much. But check that. You can see there why they call it Cliffview.
Oh, yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah, right up on the cliff.
Sick pic.
Isn't that amazing? So that's going to be our base for exploration right there.
It's a good base.
I know, man. I can't wait. It's going to be fun. And we're still just really beginning to work on the itinerary. We usually go through 3 or 4 perspective itineraries to get, you got to fit how much time you've got, how much distance you got to travel, and what's the most awesome stuff to see. All of that. We'll have some great food. We got one guy who's going to be working on putting the whole food thing together. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a combination of having a lot of fun and also learning some really awesome stuff and traveling around exploring these amazing landscapes.
Yeah. Sounds awesome. Well, that'll be on your website, I assume, at some point.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah, that'll be on the website. It's we've got it reserved for the last week in March.
Okay.
If you need a guy to capture it all, let me know. I'll bring some gear.
Yeah, Maurice is a professional photographer, videographer, and actually, that's when we're going to be premiering our documentary, though, Maurice. So we'll have to see what weekend that is.
Oh, okay.
We'll definitely the premiere is the second week, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I'm definitely down. And like I said, too, at some point we'd like, whether it be on your own or a trip or whatever, come to Michigan. Because I do think, we can get into some stuff. And actually, I would like to get back up to the UP, too, because there's some amazing stuff up there.
Yeah. Is that Upper Peninsula?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, I've never been up there. I'd love to do that. And
there's rock quarries. We went through this underground cave, Maurice and I. The one year we were up there, this thing got tight. I'm a big boy. I'm like 6'2", so some of the areas got a little tough to get through. But it was this underground cave. You almost had to die to get to the bottom because it was like all moss to get to this like opening, this cave mouth opening. And then, it's all dark for, I don't know, how many miles do you think that was? Like a mile or two, Maurice?
I don't know. Probably around that, maybe a little less.
And when you get out, you're like, oh, I couldn't imagine doing that. Imagine like living like that too, and just having to find your way through caves like that. Like, that's crazy.
Well, if we do any caving, Maurice, I'm going to let you go ahead of me. And I figure if you go through without getting stuck, then I should be able to.
Yeah. I'll pave the way. I'm down.
Okay.
Now you should send me because
I'll sacrifice myself for you, my friend.
Yeah, you'll know.
If Mike can get through, then there's high probabilities that the rest of us will be able to get through. Is that what I'm?
If I can get through, anybody can get through. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm telling you, I'm working on that, man. I'm basically a young skinny guy trapped in the body of a fat old guy. Is the way I put it.
I'll tell you what.
Inside, there's a young skinny guy when you're trying to get out.
I'll tell you what. You're looking great. You're looking very God-esque. You know, you got that look. You know, so keep doing what you're doing. I mean, I got to tell you, having my son just turned 1, and I'll tell you, just picking him up because he's a big boy. He's going to be way bigger than I am, and okay. it's whipping my ass into shape. So. Oh, good, and it will. This is your first son? Yeah. Okay. Well, it just gets harder from here. Oh, I know. He's 1. So is he ambulatory yet? Yeah, I mean, he's walking, he's talking, okay. he's doing everything pretty much. I mean, he's like I said, my wife takes him to the park, and they think that he's a 2-3-year-old because he's the same size as some of the other like kids that are like actually talking with their parents and stuff like that. So, but yeah, no football. That's one of the rules. No football. Okay. Well, I played football. No football. When I had my kid, the first. I thought, once he was born, I'm thinking, this is easier than I thought it was going to be. And I don't know what you do, but we had a bassinet for him with a side that folded down. Yep. And me and my wife just brought that bassinet in, set it next to our bed on her side. So if he woke up at night, when he's a month or a few months old and started to whimper or cry, fold down the bassinet, roll over, and I barely even knew it, and I'm thinking, what? I was like prepared for what is all this stuff about, stalking the floor at night. And right. I never had any of that. And I'm thinking, this is really easy. Yeah. Then he started walking. Then it suddenly just morphed into a whole other level of complexity. Oh, yeah. Like constantly, oh, my God, no, don't go there. Don't, because it's a lot easier when you can just set them down and they basically stay there, right? Yeah, I think it's when you're first one. I mean, I'm overly cautious, obviously, but I look at my sisters who have had each a few kids, and they're like, it's all right, it'll be okay, okay. But yeah, it's one of those things where he's on the move, and he's a big boy. He's smart too, and I don't know. Sure we've got our hands full. We've got our hands full. That's for sure. So yeah, just don't. I mean, I hope you don't dump him in some public school somewhere where they start brainwashing him at 5 years old. I mean, I'm gonna teach him what I've been wanting to be taught in schools for a long time.
Randall knows what's up.
Whether he's being taught in school or not, I'm gonna teach him philosophy when he turns 5, 6. So like, just start with the basics, and go from there. By the time he's 5 or 6, we should have our school up and running. And I'm hugely about wanting to bring young people. I want it to be a school where you'll have young people and old people and middle-aged people and everything in between all sitting in a classroom together. And this has started happening now. I've had kids now coming on a lot of my tours recently in the last year or two. And I remember first time somebody asked me, a lady asked me, this was a tour we did 2 years ago about, she called and she says, well, I really want to come on your tour, but I have a 9-year-old. So, and, said, well, bring your 9-year-old. And it turned out she brought this wonderful little girl who's now been on 3 tours because the girl who is now then 9, I guess she's now 10 approaching 11, or maybe she just turned 9. She came on the first tour, and I remember that first day, she was the only child, and she was very shy, didn't say much. By 4 days later, 5 days at the end of the tour, she's totally buddies with everybody. She's laughing, having a good time, playing tricks on people. The last tour she was on, the whole tour, she's there with her notebook and her pen taking notes.
and we had 4 kids on the tour, and I thought it went great. I thought it was just, I really enjoyed having kids because they're not jaded. They're wide open. And then having kids, some of them became really good friends. So yeah, I want something, and I organized classes for homeschool students for 15 years.
Yeah, that's what you were saying last time. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that.
I had my policy was that, parents would come to me, and sometimes it was kids that's been homeschooled their whole life. Other times it was kids who had been in public school and it just wasn't working out for any number of reasons. So what I did, what my approach to it was that I would say I rented a room in a church, and it was a big enough room that I had, I typically would have anywhere from 5 to 8 students, and I kind of cut it off at there because I noticed once you get to 7 or 8 students, as long as you're not over that, I was able to like pretty much know where everybody was at, in terms of math. If somebody was not getting it, I knew that they weren't getting it. And I realized once you got up to about 10 kids, I was starting to not be able to keep up. Like, who's not getting it, And I'm thinking, what's it like if you've got a class with 25 or 30 kids, right? So obviously, with mathematics, that's the kind of thing. So many people came in. I heard this over and over again from both adults and kids. Well, I don't have an aptitude for math. I did really lousy in math in school. And I said, well, it's not that you don't have an aptitude. I mean, you have your brain is at least 1,000 cubic centimeters, right? And so you have an aptitude for math, but math is the kind of thing that has to be individually tailored. A person has to learn it at their own pace. When you have a small group, that's possible. And what I would do was the ones that learned it faster, I would get them to help the ones that were a little bit slower, right? So it was a way of kind of equalizing things out, and it helped the ones, the thing is that even if you're smart and you get it right away, if without repetition, it doesn't necessarily sink in unless you're got an eidetic mind or a what do you call it?
Photographic memory.
Photographic. I'm trying to say a photogenic. Yeah, if you have a photogenic brain. But yeah, so the thing is I very much about that. Repetition is how you really. That's why I'll go over stuff with people multiple times, because you hear it once. Oh, I heard that already. I don't need to hear that again. And then 30 days later.
I think we talked about that either on the first or second episode, was how you were explaining how you got better at remembering things through the your Masonic rituals, or like going over the Masonic rituals. I thought that was really interesting because that's I was actually blessed with a really, really good memory. And I have OCD on top of that, but you're right. If you don't understand, because like I'll remember things, and then in the conversation, it's like, oh, but I should have understood it more. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's one thing to just remember something, like, because there's so much knowledge out there. Some of the more peripheral topics I don't know a ton about, the stuff or whatever, so I have to rely on my memory, but then even then it's like I don't fully understand that, so I'm just not gonna speak on that. But yeah.
And 15, 20 minutes ago I was trying to remember the name of the research source that I used, and I couldn't remember. I said it started with an R. ResearchGate.
There you go.
It's called ResearchGate.
All right.
For anybody who's doing research,
I know ResearchGate.
Yeah. But that was in there. The drawer, the file drawer, was a little rusty. I couldn't get it open right away. But by letting it rest, the thing just kind of rose up to the surface. ResearchGate. Yeah, I got it now. But
I like that.
And you, as a musician, know that if you're going to get good at a song, you have to do it over and over and over and over again, right?
Uh-huh.
You have to. It's the repetition that leads to the perfection. And so when people start, showing signs of intellectual laziness, they just want, I just want everything, and I want it now, and I don't have to work for it, and I don't want to put forth any efforts. Say, listen, that's not an attitude that's going to
No, you're right. And actually, it's more for us, at least. I can't speak to everybody, but for you're talking about music, it was more rewarding. Like our guitar hero Trey Anastasio from Fish, he was doing stuff with jazz and fusion, and the way he jams, like to improv the way that some of these bands that we like, jam bands, improv. You not only have to understand music theory, but you have to know how to employ tactical things in the jam, like tension and release, and coming back to the main melody and playing off of that, and
absolutely,
and things like that. So it's a very, for us, it was an intellectual pursuit. It wasn't like, oh, I just like playing the guitar, man, or whatever. It was a very intellectual thing, and through that you become good at the guitar because you want to do those things that these people are doing, and you're not going to get there by, like you said, like being lazy or whatever, or taking shortcuts.
That's exactly right. So yeah, I'm thinking, let's see, it's now 2:00.
Yeah, we're gonna wrap it up here.
2 a.m. So I'm loving the conversation. Would like to keep going for another hour, but
no, we're gonna have
to. Yeah, we're gonna have to wrap it up. I just have to do a few more things before bed, and then I've got a big day. Friday is always Thursday tomorrow, but I got a lot on my schedule tomorrow and Friday, and then I'm still putting the pieces together for this Festival of the Dead on Sunday night.
Festival of the Dead. So yeah, again, everybody go check out the links down below to Randall's website. He's doing that Festival of the Dead stream. He also is going to be featured on episode 8 of Graham Hancock's new series, Ancient Apocalypse. When does that air, by the way? When's the release date?
It's going to air on, I don't know the time. It's going to air on November 11th. That's going to be the same day as we're recording it on the 7th. It'll be released on the 11th, the same day that Netflix launches the series.
Awesome. Do you know, too, is it going to be one of those things where you can watch all the episodes at once, or are they going to be staggered released?
I actually don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I've wondered. Yeah, I don't know. I heard at one point they might be like an all-at-once release, so if somebody wanted to binge watch.
Yeah, usually Netflix does that. Some things I think that they do it the other way, but yeah, hopefully that's the case because I like to binge that kind of stuff.
Well, I think it should be fun, and I think people are going to find it very interesting, and particularly I can guarantee you'll never look at Halloween the same again.
Nice.
Ooh.
And growing up, I think Halloween was second only to Christmas as far as
fun.
Because I loved scary stuff.
Yeah.
As a kid, I loved anything to do with monsters and scary stuff.
None of that stuff scares me. I wish it did. The real scary stuff, I don't know if you've seen, but Hereditary, that movie, or like Midsommar. Check
Hereditary.
those out.
Sounds familiar.
That'll keep you thinking a couple days.
Okay.
I'll text it to you. to you.
Okay. All right.
So you don't forget, because I do want you to watch. If you like spooky or creepy things, you'll like those two movies.
Okay. Well,
and there's psychological thrillers too. They're not just
okay.
Well,
I grew up. When I was 1958, when Universal released all of their classic 30s and 40s monster horror movies to television, I was 7 years old, and by some, I don't know who was the programming director, but one of the local stations there in Minneapolis, where I would watch. I don't know if you guys are old enough. You probably are. When Saturday morning cartoons was a big thing for kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that was when we took over the television and we would watch.
Are you saying we're old now? Is this what you're saying?
Well, yes, but that's implicit in what I'm saying. But I don't know who made this decision, but they started showing the like at noon. I think it was at noon, maybe 1 o'clock. It was like after the cartoons, they would show the old Universal horror movies. Frankenstein, Dracula with Bela Lugosi, Invisible Man with Claude Rains, The Werewolf of London, and all of these stories, right? So I just remember one morning, and reason I know I was 7, I would have guessed I was 7, but I went back and actually researched when Universal released these movies to television. And so I knew then that I was 7 years old, and I was watching it, and they were playing Werewolf of London. And it was about this botanist who is in search of this rare plant that only blooms under the full moon. And it was in Tibet. So he makes this expedition to Tibet, and he's going up to where they think this flower is, and all of the porters are superstitious, and they get scared, and they refuse to go any further. So he's got one guy with him, and they're going up, and then this guy gets afflicted with some kind of weird force, and he can't move or something. So the hero, the botanist, he goes on alone, and he's up there on the cliff. He's looking through binoculars, and he sees the plant. I think it was the Mariposa plant. And there it is. He sees it at the base of this big boulder. So then he goes over there, and he's kneeling down. Now, I'm watching this, and, of course, I don't know what it's about, but it's interesting because they're in the mountains and this strange forest. I'm starting to get interested, right? So he kneels down in front of this big boulder, and as he's kneeling down there, you see on the top of this boulder, you see like, this is what you see, something like this.
Yeah. Oh,
the werewolf comes up over the top of the boulder. And I'm like, what is that? Like, oh my God, but at that moment, I was hooked. That was the moment I became hooked on monster movies. So I grew up right into my teenage years being obsessed with monster movies, and saw them all, and I'm sure that led into some of the more anomalous things that I've been into all of those years. And then alongside that, of course, was dinosaurs and monsters. Those were my two big things as a kid.
Well, I mean, dinosaurs are monsters, basically, real ones.
Well, they are. Yeah, they are.
But okay. Festival of the Dead, Sunday night. Please check it out. I mean, I'm highly recommending this thing, and I don't do that often. So everybody go check it out. I know it's going to be great. His Atlantis live stream was awesome, that 2-part one. When did you do that? It was like April or something. That was awesome.
I think part 1 was in February.
It was. You're right.
A month later, we did part 2. Yeah.
That was awesome. I know this is going to be badass, too. So check this out. I have the link down below to his website. He's got a how-to page. Check that out. Check out his YouTube channel. He has a podcast, Kosmographia, that he does with the Snake Brothers, Russ and Kyle. Shout out to them. And shout out to Brad and Mike. And, anything else you want to plug?
Darren and Graham of the Grimerica.
Okay.
The boys, they're good guys. We've been working with them now for...
We've had Darren on. I think we had Darren on a long, long time. Probably 3 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, we collaborated on this last 2-week Scabland trip we did a couple of months in September.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So we're working together. And then, there's what's happening is there's kind of a team of people, an extended team growing around this. People bringing different skill sets to the table and different knowledge sets. And it's amazing what's starting to happen. And I think there is a network growing. And really, from my perspective, I mean, we've had people now from all over the world come on some of our tours. And also, I'm getting connections with people all over the world. And there are people all over this planet that are really asking questions and going, there's more to this story. And I really, it sounds a little bit kind of hyperbolic and new agey, but I really think that we are getting close to some kind of an awakening.
Well, I hope
there's
so.
There's a lot of shit going on. And a lot of, I'll say, bullshit out there. And we don't need to get into that. But I think
we're in a fool's gold age right now. Anybody who's awake and thinking and paying attention knows that there's a lot of BS coming out there. And it's usually coming from the upper echelons. But at any given time, there are tools available if people will just start paying attention. I'll end with this.
I don't know. And at some point, I really want to dive in and actually do some podcasts and even conferences or whatever on diving deep into the Grail mythos.
Okay.
Which I consider to be one of the most potent and powerful traditions within part of Western occultism or the Western esoterica. It's extremely powerful, potent stuff once you dive into it. And where was I going with this? Well, part of it, I think, has to do with it's showing us a peek behind that veil. It's parting that veil somewhat, and we're able to peer into this world that is gone now and is left only traces. It's almost like the ghost of that world is still here. Palimpsest is the word. You know what a palimpsest is? It's where you would have an old document or an old painting, for example. Artist wants to reuse the canvas, so he paints a new painting over the old painting, or you write the new document is written on top of the old document. But if you peer very closely, you can begin to see the outlines of what was there underneath. That's kind of the metaphor that I use to understand. There is a veil that separates our 10,000 years of Holocene from the 200,000 years of deep history. And I think there are people all over the world that are becoming aware of that. We're also realizing that there's almost like the human species and human civilization is at a crossroads right now. One of those roads is going to lead to oblivion. We're going to go down through this Malthusian fight over diminishing resources, and we can see that in what's happening right now in our foreign policy. We're lining up. We're making an enemy out of our competitor, Russia. We're doing the same thing now to China. To what end? To what end? I mean, I don't see anything suggesting what the end game here is of this confrontational foreign policy that we've got. But on the other hand, there is the other road. There's one road that leads to oblivion. And basically, that has to lead to totalitarianism if it doesn't lead to Armageddon. Because we're already going to see that. Pay close attention to what happens in Europe this winter, because now they're going to be deprived of energy. And energy is what keeps our civilization going, right?
Yeah.
When people find themselves sitting in the cold and the dark, and they're hungry, maybe that's what it's going to take for them to begin to question the dominant paradigm right now. But at any given time, all it's going to take is enough people to wake up, to activate their minds, and become aware of the fact that we have the resources to completely change the paradigm. And so this is why I say we're at a crossroads. One road leads to oblivion. The other road leads to magnificent realities that we can only just begin to understand.
We need people, and I'm not saying this because of like whatever, but like we need more people to study the stuff that we're into, like philosophy and
yes.
The origins of things and how things got to where they are, and stop paying attention to the day-to-day grind bullshit. Because like staring at your TV and drowning out and doing the same shit you do every single day, clockwork, is not going to get anything done. It's just going to contribute to this mess. So
that's right.
But I really appreciate what you're doing, man. I really do. And I appreciate, the way you approach everything, and not even just the data stuff, and obviously all your stuff with the Younger Dryas and the Cataclysms and all that's amazing. But I also think your philosophy and you wanting to help people understand these things and everything, I think that's amazing. And I think that you don't get enough credit for that. But I want to give you a little here. So congratulations.
Well, thanks, Mike.
But I also,
appreciate it, man.
I want to plug you again. Festival of the Dead, Sunday night. Please buy a ticket. Also, if you want to go on one of these trips, check out Randall's website. Go check out, what they're doing. They're going all over the place. Scablands, Tennessee. You saw this mound trip. The thing looks amazing. So check that out.
Chacoan culture of the Southwest.
There you go.
We've done 3 tours out there now.
that Chaco documentary, I forget what it's on, maybe Netflix, is amazing too, where they talk about that sun.
The sun dagger.
The sun dagger, exactly. We learned about that. Actually, I learned about that in high school. So shout out to my astronomy teacher. We were fortunate enough to have a planetarium in our high school. So,
we're going to have a planetarium and an observatory at the Carlson Academy.
Nice. That was
beautiful.
That was a fun first hour for Maurice and I. Let me tell you.
I don't even remember it.
Dabbled in the cannabis arts. Went one time on the mush. Had a great time. So. And I got an A on my paper. I actually wrote a song to the beat of the sun, doing the hydrogen walk. So
really,
kind of nerdy, but
nerdy.
So shout out to check all those amazing things out. And again, Ancient Apocalypse, November 11th. Also earlier that day, please watch Randall on Joe Rogan with Graham Hancock, because I'm sure it's going to be amazing. It always is when these two get together. So check that out. And if you want to check out, what we're doing, which isn't nearly as cool, but I actually would appreciate it. We have our Linktree link down below. We've got a Patreon. Randall was kind enough to actually, now this is history. This is the longest Mind Escape episode that we've ever done. So this is history in the making out of 263 episodes. But if you're interested and you want to see more Randall, we do have 2 Randall episodes that are on our Patreon. It's just $2 a month. And both one episode's on sacred geometry and the other one's on the cosmic numbers. We have a merch store. Please leave us a nice review on Apple Podcast and Spotify or whatever you're listening to. And check out our new podcast, the Roswell UFO Symposium. I have the Linktree link down below there. We are just getting going with that. We are 4 episodes in, but we have an amazing, the top UFO and UAP researchers are going to be on the show. We already have a lot of commitments from people. And shout out to Toby, shout out to Shane, shout out to Chase, and shout out to everybody. We love everybody. I want to thank Maurice for coming back for this episode. He's busy editing our documentary. And it's wedding season, and no, he is not he's not marrying people. He's just a photographer, folks. But listen,
he's not a justice of the peace.
He's not a justice of the peace. It did not take him 2 minutes online to start marrying people. But we love Maurice. We want Maurice back in the mix. So I'm sure after our documentary is done, he'll be joining us again. But again, I just want to give a shout out to everybody. Shout out to UFO Twitter. Shout out to everybody we love. And listen, we're going to do this again. And but I just want to say I love everybody. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Peace.
Good night, everyone.